Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case. The case of Scott Collins. Fred Rose was born in 1950 in California, USA. In the early 1970s, Fred married his beloved Sharon. They decided to take their time and enjoy their first years together before giving birth. In 1976, they welcomed their first child, Justin. 2 years later, they had a daughter named Amy, and then their youngest child, Heather, was born. Balancing their professional lives with raising children provided them with a happy life. For Fred, family was extremely important, and he cherished every moment spent with them, whether during daily life or on vacations. They had fun trips, and one of their most memorable vacations was in San Diego, where the children were thrilled to see the many animals at the local zoo. In the early 1990s, their family lived in the Valencia area of Santa Clarita County, Los Angeles. Fred worked as an executive at a construction company that specialized in maintaining petrol stations. His job was based in Lancaster, but it required him to travel frequently. Nearby lived a 21-year-old man named Scott Forrest Collins. Scott lived with his mother. He had a long criminal history that included offenses such as arson, stabbing a man, stealing a woman's car, and threatening a teenager with a knife. In 1989, he was convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to 5 years in prison, but he was released on parole in late December 1991, returning to life on the streets of California. After his release, Scott reconnected with his mother, who some people described as manipulative and controversial. Shortly after his release, Scott began dating with a young woman. She lived with her parents, just a few blocks away from his cousin Amaya. Scott and Amaya were the same age, shared similar interests, and were part of the same group of friends involved in gangs and criminal activities. On Wednesday, January 22, 1992, Fred was on a business trip in Fountain and stayed overnight. The next day, at 11:00 a.m., Scott's mother dropped him off in Lancaster. He was dressed in blue pants, a sweatshirt, and popular brand sneakers. Later that day, around 1:00 p.m., Fred returned to his office in Lancaster and had a brief chat with his boss, Thomas Marriott. After the conversation, it was past 2 p.m. Realizing he was late for lunch, he informed Barbara Kopp, the office manager and dispatcher, that he was going to get a hamburger. As part of her responsibilities, Barbara kept track of employees and noted their departure time, so she checked her watch and recorded the exact time Fred left. Fred usually visited a fast food restaurant near his workplace, but on that particular day, he decided to do something different. After getting into his gray company car, he was approached by Scott, who threatened him and demanded the code for his bank card. Scott then drove about 90 kilometers south. At around 4 p.m., Fred then completed a transaction at the ATM. A bank employee reported that Fred withdrew $200 from the Northridge branch at 4:05 p.m. A minute later, another withdrawal attempt was made, but it was declined because Fred had reached his daily limit. The entire incident was recorded on surveillance camera. After the transaction, Scott held Fred's wallet in hand, forced him to drive to the San Fernando Valley. Meanwhile, Fred's co-workers began to worry when they noticed he had left his computer on and his briefcase open, which was uncharacteristic of him. After a long drive from 6:00 to 6:30 p.m., Scott realized he couldn't allow Fred to betray him. He forced Fred out of the car by the train tracks, aimed his weapon, and attacked Fred. Scott then fled the crime scene in Fred's car. A man lived nearby, heard 2 detonations about 3 to 5 seconds apart after he went outside. He noticed a car driving away to the west without its headlights on, although it was dark. He thought the car might be silver or gray. Another neighbor also heard the detonations and looked out her window, see the same thing. Besides, she noticed that there was a sticker on the car's bumper. A third neighbor also reacted to the detonations. He suspected that the car might be related to the incident and attempted to note the license plate, but the darkness made it impossible to see. Meanwhile, Sharon was worried because she had not heard from her husband. She called friends for information, but when neither his boss nor his mother, Doris Baker, no information. So Sharon filed a missing person report with the police just before 9 p.m. A man was jogging near the railroad tracks, found one person lying on the ground. Initially thinking the man was just drunk, he continued running. However, when he returned 20 minutes later and saw that the man was still there, he approached and noticed blood. He quickly ran to a nearby garage and called 911. The first responders to arrive were from the LA Fire Department. Although the victim suffered a bullet wound to the head, there were still signs of life. Fred, unable to speak and in a state of panic, the rescuer placed an oxygen mask on him, while the second rescuer removed Fred's clothing to check for additional injuries. Fred was then airlifted to Northridge Medical Center. Meanwhile, Scott filled up the car with gas and paid with one of the credit cards he stole. He attempted to buy a 12-pack of beer, but the cashier asked for identification, so he left without them. Meanwhile, the officers arrived at the scene and secured this area. Detective then joined the team at the crime scene. He requested a photographer who took numerous pictures of the area, noticed footprints near the bloodstains, which were also photographed. On Friday morning, while Fred was fighting for his life and his family prayed for a miracle, Scott said goodbye to his girlfriend without telling she what had happened. He gave her $40 and left. A few hours later, they met again and went to Tecate, where Scott bought a beer with a $100 bill. 2 days after the attack, at 11 a.m., doctors determined they could do nothing more for Fred and removed him from life support. Sharon and her 3 children embraced in sorrow. The autopsy, conducted by Dr. William Ryan, revealed that Fred died from an assault weapon wound to the upper right back of his head. Although the bullet was not retrieved, small lead fragments were found. Dr. William, drawing on his experience, provided key insights to investigators. He noted that the size of the wound and the brain damage indicated that the injury was likely caused by a short-barreled weapon. That evening, Scott and his girlfriend went to buy 4 cases of beer. Knowing that her boyfriend did not have a permanent job, she began to suspect something. Scott, however, reassured her that his cousin had given him some money. A group of young people joined Scott to drink and listen to music, with most of them being minors. They noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street. Scott admitted to his cousin that he had stolen the car. He also showed off a weapon that was wrapped in a handkerchief. However, the weapon had a problem. To use it, he had to insert a nail into a hole beneath the barrel. Scott's reckless behavior heightened the excitement of the party, and everyone was curious about his criminal activities. Later that night, Scott and his friends decided to go to the Smile. They moved to the nearest field where Scott held the weapon and make it work. The group then moved to a residential area, targeting 2 people but missed. Despite trying several more times, this weapon continued to malfunction. The police received information about a group of dangerous subjects, and immediately a chase took place. In a scare, Scott threw several items out of the window, including a weapon, bullets, credit cards, and a watch. The situation escalated when the car crashed into a fence. The constable approached them and instructing them to remain still. As the only adult, Scott was taken to Kern County Jail, while the others were transported to a juvenile detention center. Scott was dressed in a dark shirt, blue pants, branded sneakers, and a baseball cap. In his pants pockets, they found a wallet, gloves, a handkerchief, and 2.38 caliber bullets. Near the crash site, they discovered the car keys, credit cards belonging to Fred, a .38 caliber bullet, and an empty shell casing. Finally, about a block and a half away, they recovered a weapon with a broken hammer and another bullet, along with 2 empty shell casings, which appeared to match attacks that had missed their target. The investigation continued, including testimony from other team members. Eventually, each member disclosed what they had heard from Scott. Besides, the forensic scientist and fingerprint expert analyzed the shoe prints found at the crime scene, comparing them with the soles of Scott's shoes. He concluded that 7 of the photos matched the shoe sample of the suspected individual. The detective confirmed that the fingerprints were located just inches away from the reddish stains left by Fred at the scene of his fatal attack. Then, Scott was interviewed. At this time, Scott still steadfastly denied any involvement in Fred's murder. Based on witnesses and valuable evidence available, in March 1992, Scott was officially charged with murder and armed robbery. Scott maintained his innocence and denied all accusations. Meanwhile, Justin and Amy sought counseling to help them cope with the loss of their father when they were both teenagers. After a long wait, the trial concluded in 1996 when Scott faced court in Van Nuys. During the trial, witnesses described him as a kind and peaceful man. Scott asserted that he had simply stumbled upon an abandoned car and drove off. Inside, he found a wallet and used the credit cards, but he insisted he was not involved in the crime. Neil Potter, the manager of patents and inventions for the company that made the athletic shoes worn by the defendant, testified that the shoe prints found at the crime scene matched size 13 OVI shoes, though he acknowledged there could be slight size variations. Neighbors from the area also provided testimony. After 4 days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict on September 30, 1996. Scott Forrest Collins was found guilty of first-degree murder, along with 2 special circumstances: murder committed during a robbery and murder committed during a kidnapping with intent to rob. This verdict led to a sentencing hearing on October 12, where defense attorney Bruce Hill tried to challenge the prosecution's evidence. He pointed out Scott's troubled upbringing and a diagnosis of attention deficit disorder. Judge Howard Schwab ultimately sentenced Scott to death for the murder of Fred Rose. While Scott awaited his execution on death row, Heather, Justin, and Amy focused on healing and adjusting to adulthood, while Sharon chose not to remarry. Fred's absence was deeply felt, especially during important times like Christmas. In 2019, California Governor Gavin Newsom announced a temporary halt to executions in the state. In December 2020, George Gaskin, a former deputy police chief in Los Angeles, became the city's district attorney. He started implementing reforms aimed at improving sentencing practices, banning certain firearms, and re-examining past convictions. In there, one case that was reviewed for possible leniency was that of Scott. The prosecutor's office argued that Scott's good behavior over more than 20 years saved him from the death penalty. Former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani raised concerns to the media, highlighting the distress caused to Fred's family. He noted that there was no real benefit in the current context due to the governor's pause on executions. This situation caught Sharon and her children off guard. They saw the prosecutor's actions as a favor to the convicted individual. Consequently, the family's lawyers, along with vocal critic George Steve Cooley and attorney Katie KDI, filed a lawsuit claiming that the criminal justice system was failing. In that situation, George Gaskin's office clarified that their intention was not to release Scott, but rather to halt his execution. Sharon openly shared her frustration, pointing out that neither she nor any family members received clear explanations regarding the petition. When she attempted to view the case file, she was directed to a virtual call and later discovered that the case records had been removed from the online database. They were initially told the authorities would have months to review the documents before any commutation agreement was submitted, but that did not happen. The agreement was made without knowledge of the Rose family. Amy also expressed that she, her brothers, and their mother felt betrayed and anxious, especially when they were later told not to pursue a trial. She insisted on their right to have legal representation and seek justice. For Amy, the concern extended beyond the current sentence. She feared that a commuted death sentence could eventually lead to a life sentence being reduced in the future. Feeling powerless, she and her brothers reached out to a private law firm for assistance. Ultimately, a hearing took place before Superior Court Judge William Ryan. Amy, in a written statement read to the court, discussed the lasting trauma of losing her father as a teenager and how knowing Scott was incarcerated had brought her comfort. However, the possibility of his sentence being revoked had resulted in many sleepless nights for her. In February 2022, Fred Rose's family learned that Scott would be sentenced to life in prison without the chance for parole. This decision confirmed that neither he would ever be released. Then, Scott was moved to a voluntary program at the correctional facility in Tehachapi, California, which is designed for prisoners who show good behavior. In the meantime, the Rose family cherishes their happy memories of Fred, a caring husband and father who had left a lasting mark on all who knew him. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Terry McAdams. The main character in today's story is Terry McAdams, a vibrant and active 22-year-old from Arlington, Texas. Since her teenage years, she enjoyed driving around the neighborhoods in her convertible. She often spent time in the city with friends, listening to music. Terry was a bright and popular cheerleader who always drew attention but remained modest and well-mannered. She deeply loved her sisters, Hopper and Pamela, and shared a close bond with all her relatives. Terry acted as a mentor for her sisters, bridging the gap between them and their mother. She enjoyed dancing with them and even taught them how to drive. Everyone who knew Terry described her as a person who loved life. After graduating from high school, she enrolled in the University of Arkansas. Before completing her degree, she decided to move to Arlington to be with her fiancé, Karen Anderson, who was a few years older and had already graduated. After graduation, she planned to start a career and marry Karen, who proposed to her. Since 1984, local newspapers have been reporting on the murders in the Fort Worth area. During this time, Terry was studying at university and took the threat very seriously. She was genuinely afraid for her life, a concern she shared frequently with Karen and family. To protect herself, Terry made several significant changes. She quit her well-paying job in Irving, where she had to drive every day and return home in the dark. Understanding the potential danger, she decided it wasn't worth the risk of driving at night. Despite being young and energetic, Terry began to live a very cautious lifestyle. She stopped going out at night, avoided parties, and only left her home during the day when accompanied by Karen. She even felt anxious about going grocery shopping and often called her mother multiple times a day to express her fears. Terry was genuinely worried about the situation, especially since the authorities had not yet identified the criminal, leaving the streets of Arlington feeling unsafe. Around the same time, Texas police bodies formed a task force consisting of experienced experts to look into a series of violent crimes and prevent further massacres. They believed that a serial killer, or potentially multiple terrorists, were active in the area. Terry felt particularly anxious because she fit the profile of the victims. They were all attractive, around her age, and lived nearby. It was difficult for her to cope, but Karen provided strong support. She admitted to her mother and sisters that being alone was the most frightening part. To help her feel safer, Karen decided to leave his job and accept a new high-paying position closer to home, though it occasionally required business trips to nearby cities. During her moments of panic, she limited her outings and rushed home after school. For any important tasks, she aimed to handle them early in the morning and always sought someone to accompany her. On the morning of February 13, 1985, the local police station received a disturbing call. An employee responsible for technical maintenance at the residential complex where Terry lived reported that he was unable to gain access to the apartment. When the police arrived, no one answered the door, and they were unable to reach the Terry's relatives. As a result, they decided to speak with local residents. Neighbors confirmed the repairman's account. They also could not contact Terry but reported hearing suspicious noises coming from her apartment. The police then decided to break down the door to enter her apartment. Inside, they discovered a gruesome scene. Terry's body was found in the bedroom on the bed. Terry had been raped and brutally beaten with a blunt object. Based on the condition of her body and the blood evidence, it seemed the crime took place at night or early in the morning before the police were called. Forensic experts quickly arrived at the scene to begin their investigation. It was clear that there had been a struggle and Terry had fought back. They found numerous defensive wounds on her arms and upper body, and her face was severely disfigured from a prolonged beating. There were signs of strangulation on her neck, but the forensic expert believes the attacker did not kill her that way. Instead, she died from a severe head injury. She also suffered brutal rape, but it is unclear whether this occurred before or after her murder. DNA traces were found on her bed linen and underwear, but at that time, it was not possible to identify the owner. The analysis methods were still developing and could not be used in the investigation. Additionally, there were no surveillance cameras or geolocation tracking available. The situation became more complicated when local people learned about the tragedy and needed psychological support. The robbery theory was quickly dismissed as many valuables were still intact in the apartment, including conspicuous items. It was clear that robbery was not the motive. The police began interviewing Terry's friends and relatives, looking for people who might have had personal motives such as jealousy, hatred, or revenge. However, Terry McAdams was known to be very kind, friendly, and non-confrontational, and none of her relatives could think of anyone who would want to harm her. Police searched the crime scene but did not find the murder weapon, which forensic experts believe was a hammer or a similar metal tool. They did discover a cigarette butt in the apartment, indicating it likely belonged to the killer. Unfortunately, the technology available at the time was insufficient to extract DNA from the cigarette, and the saliva remnants were too small to analyze. The only useful information obtained was the brand of cigarettes the killer used. One theory being considered is that a serial killer may be responsible for the crimes. Police have looked into Terry's murder and other cases in the nearby area and believe the suspect may not have known the victims, and the attacks appear to have occurred spontaneously. The attacker aimed to avoid detection and leave no evidence behind. So he chose to enter through the back sliding balcony door instead of the main entrance. There were no clear signs of a break-in on the outer window frame. It is probable that he used a tree, growing a few meters away from the apartment building's wall, to reach the balcony. Unfortunately, aside from these basic observations, police were unable to gather any useful information. Police spoke with the family of the Terry, particularly her mother and sisters, who had the closest bond with her. They were all understandably shocked by the tragedy. Terry, known for her cheerful demeanor, seemed incapable of having enemies, especially ones who would wish to harm her so cruelly. Disturbingly, it appeared that Terry had a sense of impending danger. She was afraid to leave her home, fearing she could become a victim. Tragically, she was killed in her own apartment. As news of the attack spread throughout the city, the local community began to believe that there was a killer on the loose, capable of breaking into any apartment. They suspected that he might have targeted attractive women, stalked them, and attacked them. Ultimately, the community felt that no one was safe, especially young women who might be the next targets. Residents decided to take matters into their own hands. Over the next few months, gun and ammunition sales skyrocketed as more people began arming themselves. Meanwhile, public pressure began to mount on the police for answers. The county sheriff appeared on a local television station, asking anyone with information about the crime to come forward. After Terry's murder was reported on the local news, police received numerous calls, but the information did not help the investigation. Initially, Terry's fiancée Karen was considered the prime suspect, but he was away on business at the time and had an alibi. The police tried to include him in the murder profile to close the case and appease public concern, but this was not possible. Terry's friends could not believe that he could commit such a crime. After his alibi of being away on business was confirmed, he was removed from the suspect list. Police spoke with Terry's relatives to reconstruct a timeline of events that took place on February 12. Terry arrived at school around 4 p.m. After leaving the university, she got into her car and drove home. Once home, she changed clothes and went shopping, again alone. Although she usually liked to invite her friends along, they were all busy that day. First, she went to the nearest grocery store to buy ingredients for a cake she planned to make for Karen to celebrate Valentine's Day. He was scheduled to return from a business trip the next morning. Store employees confirmed that they saw Terry at the checkout and even provided a receipt for her purchase. The receipt confirmed that she had purchased ingredients for baking. They determined that she left the store at around 6:30 p.m. Police questioned anyone who may have seen her at the time, looking for any suspicious behavior, such as someone following her. However, no one reported anything unusual. It appeared to be a routine shopping trip. Terry paid for her items and walked out. Terry went home and decided not to go out again, as she had scheduled a visit from a repairman the next morning to fix some wiring issues. That evening, none of the neighbors were home, and those who did hear strange noises were unable to fully grasp the seriousness of the situation. The sounds faded relatively quickly, leading people to calm down. Typically, police would look for the killer among the victim's close acquaintances. However, this time it wasn't the case. A few months ago, Terry was preparing for her wedding. Karen had given her a $5,000 engagement ring, but the police were unable to find the ring during their investigation. Initially, it was thought that the ring's disappearance could be a robbery gone wrong. However, further investigation revealed that this theory was unlikely, as nothing else was missing. Given its value, a campaign was launched to find the ring. Approximately 250 flyers with a picture of the ring were distributed to local pawn shops, including those in Fort Worth and Dallas, informing them of the missing jewelry. Despite this effort, no one reported the ring to the police. The police followed up on all potential leads, but none of them came to fruition. All of the suspects questioned provided alibis. The police focused on people with a history of violence who lived in the area. However, the investigation began to stall. Terry's relatives made efforts to promote the case. They regularly reached out to the public through various media channels. They appeared on TV and radio and distributed many flyers, but their efforts yielded no results. Eventually, the murder of Terry McAdams became an unsolved case that was filed in the archives. The Terry's family continued to seek justice, but the police lacked the necessary resources and evidence to advance the investigation. The case went cold for 36 years until 2021, when a team of experienced police and forensic experts was assembled to revisit forgotten cases, utilizing new technologies. Among these cases is that of Terry McAdams. Police used advanced DNA testing methods, allowing them to re-examine old evidence. Biological material from the perpetrator was found on Terry's underwear and bed sheets. She fought back during the attack, leaving traces of the perpetrator's skin under her fingernails. A cigarette was taken from the archives and sent for testing because the killer's saliva might be on it. This thorough analysis helped create a profile of a likely suspect. However, when this profile was checked against the database of known offenders, there were no matches. Terry's family hoped to find the killer who had been on the run for decades. Unfortunately, despite their hopes, the case remained unsolved for many more years. Fortunately, the investigation continued and eventually decided to use a new method, genetic genealogy technology, which required the assistance of the FBI. In August 2023, after exploring all possible options, the police department reached out to the Federal Bureau of Investigations in Dallas for help with the Terry McAdams case. They planned to analyze the DNA samples collected from the crime scene and the victim's body. This genetic testing aimed to create a family tree of the suspect, allowing the investigation to extend beyond the existing database, which only included known offenders. By using genealogical research, police could significantly increase the chances of identifying the suspect's relatives, particularly close ones. This method is considered very effective. At the time this study was conducted, the database had grown to the point where the probability of finding a match was close to 100%. The investigation was successful in identifying a man named Bernard Sharp, an American who had a notable history with the police in the 1980s. At the time of the crime, Bernard was 30 years old and married. He was also a neighbor of Terry, and Karen had a close relationship with him. During the investigation following the arrest, Bernard contacted the police and supported the victim's family. He provided an alibi that the police initially found suspicious, however. His wife later confirmed his alibi, leading to him being cleared of suspicion. Ultimately, all suspicions against him were cleared and the investigation continued without results. On the evening of November 3, 1985, a man called the police, claiming to be Bernard's wife's brother. He reported that he had been shot and needed assistance. After investigating, the police discovered that an armed criminal had attacked him, his sister, and her friend at their home. When the police arrived at the scene, it appeared to be a horrific massacre. He recounted that when he returned home with his sister and her friend, he found Bernard waiting for them with a gun. Bernard opened fire, killing the two women on the spot and wounding Bernard's wife's brother. Bernard's wife's brother was injured in the shooting but escaped to a neighbor's house. His injuries were not life-threatening. Bernard may not have expected his wife's brother to be there, and the shooting may have been premeditated. When Bernard realized his plan had failed, he began shooting at people. In addition to the two dead women, Bernard's wife's brother was also found wounded at the scene. Bernard was shot in the head and died from his injuries on November 3, 2008. Probably, the decision to voluntarily end his life was a factor in the tragic events that unfolded. It is now clear why the attacks on young girls in the city stopped after this tragedy. Bernard was a serial killer. During the investigation, no witnesses came forward to confirm his plans or his connection to the murders of Terry and the other girls. However, several close friends of Bernard's reported that he knew Terry's killer but did not name him. Several months after Terry's murder, Bernard was found dead after killing his wife and her friend, and seriously injuring his wife's brother. Police were unable to locate his body for an autopsy, so they had to take other measures to determine his connection to the murder of Terry McAdams. Police traveled out of state to meet with one of Bernard's registered relatives. Although the man did not want his name linked to the crime, he eventually agreed to provide a DNA sample. Forensic genealogy helped confirm Bernard's guilt. At the time of Bernard's death, police were unable to compare his DNA with the DNA found at the crime scene. They were unable to establish a connection between his previous attacks. Before killing his relatives, Bernard had only used violence and had not used a gun. Furthermore, Bernard's fingerprints were not in the police database, meaning that no matches could be found. Given the nature of the attacks, police suspect he may have been involved in other crimes in his neighborhood. He appears to fit the profile of a serial rapist and murderer. Bernard's criminal record has been turned over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, an agency known for its crime-solving abilities. However, there has been no confirmed evidence of his involvement in any other cases. For Terry's family, identifying the killer brought them relief. After 39 years, the case was finally closed. This breakthrough was made possible by new technology. Terry's sisters appeared on a local television channel and shared their feelings about the case being solved through several interviews. After nearly 40 years, they say it would have been better to see justice in person. However, they take comfort in knowing that this dangerous criminal stopped his criminal ways long ago and cannot harm anyone again. If he had not stopped, many more innocent women could have been victimized by him over the years. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Jean Dominico. Jeanine Dominico was born on August 29, 1959, in Massachusetts, USA. After graduating from college in 1987, she moved to Shore, New Hampshire, where she married Anthony Kaczynski and started a family. They had 2 children, a daughter named Nicole and a son named Charlie, born 2 years apart. Unfortunately, after Charlie's birth, Jean's marriage began to deteriorate. Anthony became aggressive and abusive, which ultimately led to their divorce. After the divorce, Jean worked hard with Nicole, who had a developmental delay. Because of Jean's dedication, Nicole learned to manage her condition by the time she started school. However, after enrolling her children in school, Jean faced financial difficulties and wanted to work more. Fortunately, a neighbor helped care for the children. Despite her busy schedule, Jean prioritized her children and spent all her free time with them. When the children turned 14 and 12, Jean began working at an insurance agency about 20 minutes from home. With her heavy workload, she could no longer pick them up from school, but the teenagers were able to get home on their own, which helped them become more independent. In 2000, while working at an insurance company, Jean met Chris McVan. He was attracted to her professionalism and deep love for her children. They began dating and eventually became engaged, but Jean chose to postpone their wedding plans. She lived in a small house that was too small for the 3 of them, while Chris had a spacious house of his own. Although Chris was eager for them to move in together, Jean asked them to wait until her children were older, wanting to build her life with them without the added stress. Chris was very understanding and sometimes slept over, but he preferred to leave early in the morning to avoid having to queue for the bathroom. As Nicole's daughter turned 16, she entered a typical rebellious phase and started a relationship that Jean disapproved of. At the same time, Charlie began associating with a bad crowd, becoming hot-tempered and aggressive. It appeared that his transition into adulthood would be even more challenging than his sister's. Jean worried greatly while she was at work, leaving the children at home alone. She was particularly concerned because their biological father had been a domestic abuser who frequently resorted to violence, and Jean feared that her son might follow that same path. On August 6, 2003, the family's day started like any other. Chris woke up at 6 a.m., kissed Jean, and went to work, looking forward to dinner that evening. Jean finished work at 5 p.m. and went home, while Chris was still busy in a meeting. When Chris's meeting finally ended around 7 p.m., he called Jean to check in before they went out for dinner, but he was surprised when she didn't answer. He thought she might be out walking the dogs or busy getting ready. Before leaving the office, Chris noticed he had a missed call from his daughter Nicole, along with a long voicemail. In the message, Nicole sounded worried and frustrated because she had not been able to reach her mother or brother. She said she was going to be with her boyfriend William. The way she spoke was so chaotic that it was difficult for Chris to understand how serious the situation was. Chris decided to drive to Jean's house to talk things over. When he arrived, he quickly noticed Jean's car in the driveway, indicating she wasn't out walking the dogs, as they were barking in the backyard. Chris thought Jean should have been home for at least 2 hours and had enough time to finish her chores before dinner. However, the house was dark and there was no sign of her. Concerned and not getting any response to his calls, Chris used his spare key to unlock the door. Once inside, he found the house eerily quiet, with the lights off as if the power had been cut. He called out for Jean as he moved through the dark rooms, but there was no reply. As his eyes adjusted to the dimness, he spotted Jean lying motionless on the kitchen floor. Chris feared she had passed out again due to her new strict diet, as she had fainted several times before from hunger. Worried she might have hit her head, he rushed over, shook her gently, and called her name, pleading for her to wake up, but she didn't respond. In the dark, Chris saw a puddle of blood beneath Jean. Panicking, he took out his mobile phone and called the rescue service. When the dispatcher answered, Chris's voice trembled, and he mumbled in confusion. He told the operator that he thought Jean had fainted due to her diet and had hit her head, which explained the blood. Without any light, he couldn't grasp how serious the situation truly was. As he waited for the police and medics, Chris sat in a chair, trying to calm down. He failed to notice the bloodstains scattered across the kitchen or the broken and disordered furniture around him. On the refrigerator, there was a note from his daughter. It explained that she wouldn't be joining the family for dinner because she was going out with her boyfriend. The note was signed William and Nicole, expressing their love and gratitude for Jean. Throughout the ordeal, Chris stayed in contact with the 911 dispatcher. However, due to his panic and shock, he struggled to follow the instructions and couldn't check for a pulse. While on hold waiting for the police, he still clung to the hope that Jean was alive. He knelt beside her, cradled her head, and gently fixed her hair. He kissed her and whispered that he loved her. In that moment, he felt how cold she was and noticed her vacant, glassy eyes. Chris came to the painful realization that Jean was dead, but he couldn't accept it. The nearest police patrol was just minutes away from the Jean's home. When the officers arrived, they were confronted with a gruesome scene. 43-year-old Jean lay in a pool of her own blood in the kitchen, having been brutally stabbed and beaten. It was clear her death was violent. Understandably, Chris, her lover, became the primary suspect. He was visibly shaking when the patrol arrived, struggling to speak after discovering her body. Karen Smith, a 29-year-old mother of 3 and a frequent babysitter for Jean, saw the disturbance in the yard and went to investigate. While Jean's fiancé was in shock and crying, the police spoke with the neighbor, hoping she might have heard or seen something during the attack. Unfortunately, she couldn't offer any useful information. The police cordoned off the area around the house, preventing local residents from entering the secured zone while they conducted their investigation. When local residents learned about the murder, they were heartbroken. The Jean was a kind and vibrant woman, making her death particularly shocking to those who knew her. Neighbors felt unsafe knowing that a dangerous killer was still at large. At the crime scene, police uncovered evidence of a horrific attack involving multiple knives. One knife was found in the sink with a broken handle, while the blade lay on the floor near the victim's body, suggesting it broke during the assault. Another knife was discovered in the backyard, and a bloody palm print was found on the refrigerator. A trail of blood stretched from the kitchen to the living room, leaving even seasoned police officers stunned by the severity of the crime. Police noted that the killer appeared so angry that they did not care about the evidence they left behind. This type of behavior often indicates that the perpetrator had a personal connection to the victim and may have harbored a deep grudge against her. After a brief examination of the scene, the officers returned to Chris, who was still in shock and struggling to answer even basic questions. They watched Chris closely, as he was the prime suspect due to his unusual behavior and the circumstances surrounding him. Once Chris was able to speak with the officers, he shared his own suspicions. After realizing that Jean's death was not an accidental fall, he believed that only one person could be responsible. In his opinion, Jean's ex-husband, Anthony Kaczynski, was abusive and had a troubled relationship with her. The police recorded his statement and spoke to Jean's neighbors and relatives, who confirmed that Jean had indeed had problems with Anthony. She had previously mentioned being afraid of him. It was known that the teenager had a bad relationship with his mother. He felt angry with her because they had become estranged from his father and other issues. After hearing the conversation, Charlie believed that his father could not have harmed his mother, so he reported this belief to the police. He quickly called his father to clarify, and Anthony assured Charlie that he had nothing to do with the incident. Later, Anthony's alibi was verified. Chris said that Jean was so afraid that she wouldn't even keep knives in the house, fearing that her son Charlie might use them in future conflicts. In fact, Jean was so afraid of sharp objects that she refused to even keep them in the house. Before she started dating Chris, she had confided many times that she felt like she was about to die from cold weapons. Surprisingly, this strange obsession turned out to be a premonition. After Chris gave her a set of knives, Jean had a hard time agreeing to use them. At first, she locked the set in her bedroom when she went to sleep. Gradually, she got used to it and started using it recently. Before the tragedy, Nicole and Jean's arguments began. Nicole increasingly clashed with her mother, who still treated her like a child. One of the main obstacles was Nicole's relationship with her boyfriend. Jean was not sure Nicole was old enough to be with Nicole's 18-year-old bad boy, William. At the time of the massacre, they had been dating for over a year. They mostly communicated on the internet. Jean and her daughter disagreed on this issue. Nicole met William in May 2002 when she was 14 years old, and the guy was 17. They began to correspond, and their connection immediately strengthened. Despite the fact that the young man lived in Connecticut with his mother, the couple seriously intended to date and develop a relationship. The young man was born prematurely in 1985 into a dysfunctional family. Once, when he was still very young, his father quarreled with his wife and struck her hard in the face. Life in a cruel and indifferent family had a negative impact on the William. From a young age, he displayed aggressive behavior, frequently breaking things and often hurting his sisters. During this time, his father's inappropriate actions forced their mother, with 5 children to care for, to seek refuge in a motel. One tragic day, the family's house caught fire, and he watched helplessly as their belongings were consumed. He feared that his father was trapped inside. The sound of fire truck sirens haunted him for many years. His mother observed that after the fire, he changed significantly. William began to frequently discuss death, exaggerate his childhood experiences, and express a wish to die to her. As he grew older, William began to exhibit cruelty and aggression, often directed at strangers. When he was 8 years old, he experienced a devastating loss when 2 of his best friends died in a car accident. This trauma deeply affected him, leading to the development of psychological disorders that resulted in his admission to a psychiatric hospital for 30 days. During his treatment, he struggled with anger towards his mother, which he expressed during phone calls. While at the psychiatric clinic, William was prescribed medication to help manage his aggression, but this had a negative impact on him. He became reliant on these drugs to control his behavior. His mother believed that repeated hospital stays were the only solution to his mental health issues. However, doctors were unable to provide a clear diagnosis, rendering their efforts largely ineffective. Starting at the age of 9, William's problems intensified. In 1994, he attacked one of his sisters with a baseball bat and damaged various items in the house. This led to another hospitalization, and similar incidents occurred 2 more times. Throughout these admissions, doctors tried to understand what disorders he was facing. Another significant episode happened when he was 13, during which he frequently ran away from school and initiated fights. The longest duration he spent in a psychiatric clinic was an entire year. After that, William continued to attack his sisters and mother, often using his favorite weapon, a baseball bat. Following a lengthy treatment at the clinic, he was prescribed a new medication aimed at stabilizing patients with schizophrenia. From that point on, William's behavior became noticeably more manageable, bringing relief to his mother and sisters. However, in 2001, about a year before he met Nicole online, he had another outburst of anger. He threatened to harm himself, prompting his mother to call the police. He was admitted to a psychiatric hospital again, where he stayed for about a month. When William started dating, he and his girlfriend began to communicate regularly through the internet and phone calls. This long-distance relationship turned out to be quite expensive, with Jean quickly noticing the high costs. Their frequent calls resulted in bills of $500 and even $1,000. The age difference in William's behavior became major concerns for Jean, who was already worried about the relationship. Jean was concerned about her daughter's future and the potential risks of her relationship with an older man. Meanwhile, William was charming Nicole with compliments and showing sensitivity, which easily swayed the inexperienced schoolgirl. Jean suspected that William was intentionally trying to make Nicole fall in love with him in order to push for a more intimate relationship. Jean recognized that this kind of behavior often comes from manipulators, and she feared her daughter might become a victim of someone like him from the internet. As a result, she tried to slow down the progression of their relationship. When Jean began to receive large phone bills, she banned Nicole from using the phone. This decision upset Nicole and led to an argument. In response, William wrote to Jean, expressing his admiration for her and thanking her for raising such a wonderful daughter. He asked her permission to continue seeing Nicole, saying that he was serious about their relationship. They had plans to move in together and start a family, and they both wanted to find jobs. However, instead of feeling happy about this, Jean was filled with fear. She felt that William was dangerous. Nicole convinced her mother to take her to Connecticut to meet William in person. Her mother saw this as an opportunity to end their relationship, believing that seeing the bad guy in person would turn Nicole off. She planned an 8-hour trip with Nicole. Unfortunately, her plan backfired. After the meeting, Nicole fell even more in love with William and ignored her mother's warnings about him. Nicole cried for 2 hours on the way home over the breakup, leaving Jean shocked at her daughter's immaturity. Nicole pleaded to transfer to a school in Connecticut so she could be near William. But Jean made it clear that until Nicole turned 18, she would live with her mother and younger brother. This became a source of tension in their relationship for the next 15 months. William got a job at McDonald's, helping his family financially while also trying to win over Nicole's mother. Meanwhile, Nicole struggled to live with her mother and brother, away from her boyfriend. Nicole and William both write letters to Jean, but their attempts seem childish and unconvincing. Jean remains adamant that Nicole must stay with her until she is an adult. William got his driver's license and saved enough money to buy a car, which made him excited to visit Nicole. In August 2003, he fulfilled his dream and went to see her. Nicole's mother hesitantly allowed him to stay for just a week so they could spend time together. Because Jean worked long hours, she let William stay at her home when she wasn't there. Their neighbor, Karen, occasionally checked on them throughout the day, claiming she was protecting them from getting too close. This, of course, was naive. One day, Nicole asked Karen to buy a pregnancy test, revealing that she and William had grown intimate. Karen was shocked and intended to tell Jean about it, but she never got the chance. Tragically, Jean was found dead in her home. The forensic expert concluded that she had been brutally beaten with a baseball bat. The evidence, including her injuries and the disarray in the house, indicated a prolonged struggle. In addition to numerous blunt object injuries, 53 stab wounds were found on Jean's body, especially on her arms, suggesting that these were defensive wounds during an attack. The most severely injured areas of Jean were her head, face, neck, and upper chest. The attacker intended to kill her. Forensic analysis revealed 28 stab wounds concentrated in the neck, face, and upper body, indicating the seriousness of the injuries. The forensic expert noted that the Jean suffered for a prolonged period. Despite multiple injuries, only one stab wound to her arm struck a vital area, rendering her unable to move or call for help. This ultimately led to her losing consciousness and dying during the assault. The attacker also punctured her lung, causing her to suffocate as it filled with blood. When Chris learned of the severity of the attack, he was devastated. At that point, he regained consciousness and was willing to cooperate with the police. He provided a DNA sample. Chris went on to blame Jean's ex-husband, Anthony, for the attack, saying that Jean had expressed fear of Anthony, claiming that he had threatened to kill her. In the evening, Nicole and William returned to the house but were stopped by the police cordon and not allowed onto the property. The officers were initially unsure of their identities. Once they recognized the young couple, the police detained them and took them to the station for questioning. William appeared very anxious and restless, explaining that his anxiety stemmed from mental health issues. His mood fluctuated rapidly. At times he was friendly and willing to talk, while at other moments he became aggressive and withdrawn. This erratic behavior raised the officers' suspicions. Nicole and William were interrogated separately. William stated that he last contacted Jean around 2 p.m. He mentioned that they had walked together in the supermarket and planned a family dinner with Jean and Chris that evening before he was supposed to return to Connecticut. He claimed he knew nothing about the attack. In contrast, Nicole began crying immediately, making it hard to understand her. She became even more distressed when she learned about her mother's death. After a while, she calmed down enough to explain that they had spent the day in the supermarket. However, her account had significant inconsistencies compared to William's, which led police to suspect that he was not being truthful. As a result, they requested DNA samples for analysis. The main issue was Nicole's story about buying a shirt that William claimed to have worn all day, but it was missing when he was arrested. He also couldn't explain the whereabouts of the new shirt, which raised suspicions. This was odd, unless he got rid of it because it was stained with blood. When the police noticed this detail, William became visibly more nervous as they asked him probing questions. Eventually, he grew aggressive and refused to talk, citing his mental health problems. The police then asked when he last took his medication. At first, he said he hadn't taken his last dose due to being held and questioned, but later he changed his story and admitted he had not taken his pills for several days. The young couple seemed to be hiding something and began to feel pressured. Nicole tearfully shares her problems with her mother, while William confesses that he has many burdens on his conscience that he feels he cannot reveal. They reveal that William has been planning to take Nicole with him when he leaves home, a plan that Jean is strongly against. William constantly pressures Nicole. This manipulation makes her feel responsible for their troubles, and she often blames her mother for forbidding them. Eventually, the couple managed to escape from the police station, but they were caught again 2 days later. This time, Nicole and William confessed to killing Jean and were questioned separately. At first, William joked about her death, but it quickly became clear he was serious. He suggested they mix prescription drugs into Jean's morning coffee, thinking she would either overdose or fall asleep while driving, leading to a fatal accident. Unfortunately for them, their plan did not succeed. William came up with a new plan. He decided to add bleach to the cream that Jean used in her coffee. However, Jean noticed the strong smell and refused to drink it, which led them to think of more extreme measures. They considered setting Jean on fire in a car, but William's childhood fear of flames made that plan unfeasible. They then thought about blowing up the house with her inside, but that plan also didn't work out. Ultimately, William chose to confront Jean with a baseball bat, a weapon he had favored since he was a child. Initially, Nicole opposed this violent idea, but after some consideration, she changed her mind and agreed. On the day of the attack, William waited at home with the electricity turned off. Meanwhile, Nicole stayed in a car parked at a nearby store, making sure Chris wouldn't come back. When Jean entered the house, an argument broke out between her and William. In a sudden moment of escalation, he grabbed the baseball bat, marking it as the point of no return. The confrontation quickly turned violent as he swung the bat. Despite Jean's efforts to defend herself, he continued to strike her. Then, he picked up a larger knife and inflicted even more injuries. When police asked William how many times he stabbed Jean, he said it was about 8, but that was a significant understatement. In reality, he inflicted 53 stab wounds on her. After the brutal incident, William tried to clean up the house before going back to the car where Nicole was waiting. Visibly shaken, he urged Nicole to go home and get him a towel to clean up the blood, and she agreed. Nicole entered the house, unfortunately stepping over her mother's body. She left a note on the refrigerator, took a towel and a knife she found, but then discarded both items before going to get William a change of clothes. The police collected evidence at the crime scene, including bloody handprints on clothes and shoes. William and Nicole were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy. From the start, William's lawyer highlighted his mental health issues. However, according to the prosecutor's office, William was aware of his actions during the attack and had meticulously planned the crime. Nicole convinced the prosecution to accept a deal. As part of this agreement, she later testified against William, resulting in her receiving a prison sentence. However, she could reduce her sentence by 5 years if she completed an educational program while incarcerated. In 2005, William's trial began. Nicole claimed her actions were motivated by innocence and love, but she had played a role in the tragedy of her mother's death. The defense highlighted William's family problems. It was known that his mother drank heavily during her pregnancy, which may have contributed to his premature birth and many of his developmental challenges. The prosecution argued that Nicole had incited him to kill his mother. Nicole was aware that her boyfriend struggled with anger management. According to the defense, she exploited William for her own gain. William argued that he should be placed in a mental hospital instead of prison. However, the trial did not support this request. The jury found William Sullivan guilty and the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Lisa Harum. Lisa Harum was born on June 12, 1981, in the Toronto suburbs of Canada. She was the second child in her family, raised by her single mother, Joanna, along with her older brother, Jason. The two siblings were extremely close, but their father's departure when they were very young left them with no memories of him. Growing up, Lisa was a lively and driven young girl with a strong passion for sports. She spent much of her childhood actively in various activities with her brother, including martial arts and team sports like soccer and volleyball. However, her true love was ballet. She spent hours each day at the dance studio, practicing rigorously. As she was naturally tall and slender from a young age, she initially seemed suited for ballet. Nevertheless, her professional ballet training required an extremely strict diet, which ultimately took a toll on her growing body. Lisa struggled with anorexia, an eating disorder, during her teenage years. She initially kept her condition a secret, believing she could handle the problem on her own. However, as her weight dropped to a critically low level, her mother intervened and admitted her to a clinic for treatment. Lisa spent several months in rehabilitation, focusing on regaining her health and weight. After completing her high school education, Lisa pursued her passion for dance and decided to explore a career in the beauty industry. Alongside her university studies, she worked as a perfumer for a large cosmetics chain. In her free time, she honed her makeup and hairdressing skills. In 2005, after celebrating his 24th birthday, Lisa felt an overwhelming desire for change. She wanted to leave Canada and move to Australia. Two primary reasons drove this decision. She craved a warmer climate and was eager to explore the world. To make the move possible, Lisa obtained a one-year work visa and traveled to Australia. Her mother accompanied her initially, staying for the first few months to ensure Lisa settled into her new surroundings. Once satisfied that her daughter was capable of taking care of herself, her mother returned to Toronto. Lisa made the decision to stay in Sydney permanently after her initial visa expired. To achieve this, she first extended her stay for another year. During this time, she gathered the necessary documents to apply for Australian citizenship. Outside of work, Lisa faces her own personal problems. Due to not having a father figure in her childhood, she often found herself attracted to older men. She often seeks concern from more mature men. Lisa's personal and professional life began to fall into place when she landed a job at a Sydney cosmetics company in 2006. She soon started dating a coworker who was nearly twice her age. As their relationship progressed, they decided to move in together, and Lisa relocated to his apartment. A few months later, they took the next step, and Lisa introduced her boyfriend to her mother and brother. And they accepted her choice. The couple traveled extensively, visiting destinations like the Seychelles and Paris, and even attending Rio de Janeiro's famous carnival. At one point, the man proposed to Lisa, and she happily accepted. However, their engagement was short-lived. About a year later, the couple broke up. While Lisa didn't reveal the specific reasons for their split, but she hinted that their age difference was a major factor. In 2010, Lisa completed her education at the Sydney College of Stylists. She secured a job as a hairdresser at a well-known beauty salon, where she quickly gained the respect of her colleagues and the trust of her clients. During this time, Lisa starts dating a new boyfriend. However, it came to a swift end when she discovered he was married. As she didn't want to damage someone else's family, she ended the relationship promptly. Before the breakup, he introduced Lisa to a businessman named Simon Gitney at a party. Unfortunately, this introduction had severe consequences for Lisa. Simon Gitney was born in December 1973 in Maryland to an immigrant family from Lebanon who held strong religious beliefs. His parents raised Simon and his 5 siblings with a firm hand. Despite this, Simon struggled with managing his emotions from a young age, frequently experiencing intense anger outbursts and displaying possessive tendencies. He could not stand rejection and often resorted to violence. Simon's behavior eventually landed him in trouble with the law. Simon's first experience in jail occurred when he was 18 years old. He showed up at his ex-girlfriend's workplace and began harassing her, prompting the store owner to intervene and throw him out. Undeterred, Simon returned with friends and attacked the store owner. Simon physically assaulted him. As a result, Simon was jailed, but only served a short sentence and was eventually released on bail due to good behavior. 3 years later, Simon was arrested again, this time for robbery. Then he resisted arrest. A physical altercation broke out and he bit off part of a police officer's ear. This act put him at risk of a serious prison sentence. Fortunately, the pastor of his family's church intervened on his behalf, which led to Simon serving only a year and a half in prison. Years later, in 2000, Simon got into trouble with the law once more. He was arrested for possessing and distributing illegal substances. Despite the severity of the crime, but he received a relatively lenient sentence and served only 2 years. After his release, Simon appeared to turn his life around. He relocated to Sydney and co-founded a successful luxury women's shoe business with some friends. The business generated a substantial and steady income, quickly making Simon wealthy. He purchased a luxurious home in an upscale neighborhood and a high-end vehicle. Simon made a concerted effort to conceal his troubled past from those around him, including roommates and romantic partners. Simon and Lisa had exchanged numbers at a party, and he soon followed up with a call. They started with casual conversations, but over time these talks developed into a romance. In January 2010, Lisa confided in Simon about her dissatisfaction with her current living situation. She expressed a desire to rent an apartment in a different neighborhood. Simon generously offered her a temporary place to stay in his luxury apartment, rent-free, while she searched for a new home. Despite initial reservations from Lisa's mother, Joanna, Lisa reassured her that the arrangement was temporary and that she and Simon were just friends. At the time, Lisa assumed Simon was gay because he takes great care of his looks and used piercings, but this assumption proved to be incorrect. For the initial 2 months, Simon maintained a reserved distance from Lisa. They lived in separate rooms, and there wasn't even a hint of intimacy between them. However, over time, they became closer, the so-called spark burned, and they started dating. When they began dating, Simon was 37 and Lisa was 28. To Lisa, Simon seemed perfect, charming, sociable, and generous. He frequently surprised her with gifts and pleasant experiences, causing her to see him as a prince in a fairy tale. As a couple, they began attending social events together, especially at an elite sports club that Simon frequents. Lisa genuinely believed she had found her soulmate and was convinced that she would spend the rest of her life happily with Simon. She happily shared her feelings with her mother, brother, and friends, but she remained oblivious to the fact that her fairy tale would soon come to an end. 6 months into their relationship, Simon's behavior began to shift in subtle ways that Lisa didn't notice at first. Unaware of the manipulation, she thinks that Simon is doing everything just for her good. However, he slowly isolated her from her friends and family, disregarded her personal boundaries, and attempted to alter her perspectives, tastes, and behavior to align with his own desires. In June 2010, shortly after Lisa's 29th birthday, Simon started pressuring her to leave her job at the beauty salon. He said that she wasn't appreciated there and she could find a higher-paying job elsewhere. However, Lisa enjoyed her work and had many loyal clients. She was also satisfied with her income and didn't see a reason to quit, so she refused Simon's suggestion. Simon was not satisfied with Lisa's decision. In August, he took drastic action. He showed up at her salon, causing a huge scandal, forcing her to quit. Despite Lisa was shocked and disappointed by Simon's behavior, but he convinced her that she no longer needed to work, as his income would be enough to support them both comfortably. He reassured her that they could afford anything they wanted and live a life of luxury. A month and a half later, Simon and Lisa moved into a high-end apartment on the 15th floor of an elite residential complex. Unbeknownst to Lisa, the apartment was filled with hidden surveillance cameras, allowing Simon to monitor her every move. He further tightened his grip on her by giving her a smartphone and laptop that he had pre-installed with spyware. The spyware enabled Simon to track Lisa's messages, emails, calls, and movements. He also gained access to her social media accounts, which he manipulated by deleting posts and photos, reading her private correspondence, and controlling her friend list. As time passed, Simon's control over Lisa grew, but he cleverly made it seem as though she was making her own decisions. In reality, he had invaded every aspect of her life, leaving her with no sense of privacy. Simon exerted control over Lisa's appearance by prohibiting her from wearing cosmetics, deeming her makeup too bold and unrefined. He also purchased unflattering clothing in dark colors, discarding her existing wardrobe due to its revealing nature, which he believed would attract unwanted male attention. Lisa's movements were restricted as well. Simon would only allow her to leave the apartment if he accompanied her, and even then, they only visited places he had selected. He also barred her from going to the gym, instead buying her expensive exercise equipment for home use, citing this as a suitable alternative. Simon's control extended to Lisa's social life, causing her to lose connections on social media. As her online connections dwindled, Simon eventually convinced her to delete her accounts altogether. Lisa had lost touch with her friends, and her interactions were under constant surveillance. The only people she was allowed to communicate with were her mother and brother, with Simon's permission. When Christmas 2010 approached, Lisa planned a trip home to Canada to spend the holiday with her family. Initially, Simon intended to join her, but then because he was busy with work, he couldn't go with her. Despite his reservations, Lisa persuaded him to let her travel alone, as she had not seen her loved ones in over a year. Simon eventually agreed, but only on the condition that she adhere to a strict set of rules he had established for her trip. Her brother Jason and her mother, Joanna, were shocked by the transformation in Lisa over the past year. Gone was the bright and cheerful beauty she once was. Her appearance had changed in every way. Without makeup, her face was barely recognizable. Her luxurious hair is tied into a ponytail and hidden under a headpiece. Her clothes were now baggy, unflattering, and black. However, it was not just her physical appearance that was alarming. Lisa's behavior had also changed significantly. She would flinch with anxiety every time the phone rang and rush to answer it instantly. This was because Simon had made it a condition for her. She had to be available to answer his calls at any time, no matter what she was doing. Lisa always stayed at her mother's house, refused to see her friends, and almost never went out, causing her mother Joanna to become extremely concerned. Joanna decided it was time to have an honest conversation with Lisa to understand why she was behaving this way. During this conversation, Lisa broke down in tears and confessed that her boyfriend Simon constantly monitored her activities, knowing who she associated with, who she talked to on the phone, and what they discussed. Lisa also revealed that Simon controlled many aspects of her life, forbidding her from working, seeing friends, going to the gym, or have any preferences. As a result, she had lost touch with all of her friends. Lisa's mother was shocked and urged her to stay in Canada, pointing out that she had no ties in Australia. However, Lisa was resolute, explaining that she loved Simon and didn't want to end their relationship. She believed their issues were temporary, given they'd only been together for less than a year, and that he would eventually calm down and become less controlling. Lisa was also convinced that Simon genuinely cared for her and wanted the best for her. Despite her family's concerns and efforts to persuade her that the relationship was unhealthy, Lisa decided to return to Australia to be with Simon. Lisa tried to ease her mother's concerns by telling her that Simon cared for her and wouldn't cause her harm. However, when Lisa went back, things took a turn for the worse. Simon restricted her from leaving their apartment and even demanded that she avoid eye contact with other men when they were out in public, insisting she keep her gaze on the ground. Furthermore, Simon started referring to Lisa by her middle name, Cecilia, because he thought it sounded more polite that way. In the spring of 2011, Lisa started experiencing pain in her leg due to an old ballet injury from her youth. Instead of taking her to a hospital, Simon arranged for a female physical therapist to visit their home 3 times a week to treat her with massages. Over time, the therapist became Lisa's closest friend and confidant, someone she trusted and shared her difficult situation with. On June 12, Lisa's 30th birthday, Simon organized a party at Sydney's most expensive restaurant, but the guest list only included his own family and close friends. Lisa was not given the opportunity to invite any of her own friends or acquaintances. As the evening came to a close, Simon surprised her by proposing and placing a ring on her finger. Lisa accepted, but her reaction was not what would have been expected, instead of tears of happiness, she began crying tears of desperation and hopelessness. Back home, Lisa called her mother to share the news of her engagement, but her excitement quickly turned to worry as she began to sob on the phone. However, her mother, Joanna, was far from thrilled. Joanna immediately expressed her disapproval of the engagement and urged Lisa to end the relationship and return to Canada as soon as possible. Lisa pleaded with her mother to stop discussing the matter over the phone because Simon might be eavesdropping on their conversation. Lisa tries to distract herself with thoughts about their upcoming wedding. However, when she tried to discuss the plans with Simon, he abruptly interrupted her and declared that he would make all the decisions, including choosing the venue, buying her wedding dress, and creating the guest list. This left Lisa feeling devastated and powerless. Feeling lost, she confided in her physiotherapist during a visit, confessing that she couldn't continue in the relationship but felt trapped because Simon wouldn't allow her to leave. Lisa and the masseuse devised a secret plan. Each time the masseuse visited, Lisa discreetly gave her some of her possessions for safekeeping, making sure Simon didn't suspect a thing. On July 28, Simon left his laptop behind in the rush, an unusual mistake since he always carried it with him. Seizing the opportunity, Lisa accessed the laptop and discovered her worst fears. She found a spyware program that allowed Simon to monitor all the data from her phone. Lisa was discovered recordings of her conversations with her mother and surveillance footage from cameras in every room of their apartment. Fearing for her well-being, Lisa used the masseuse's phone to call her mother and ask her to get on the next flight to her apartment and take she home. However, Joanna was unable to leave work immediately, as she had to arrange a shift swap with a colleague. Joanna would later deeply regret the delay this. Upon returning home, Simon quickly discovered that Lisa had accessed his laptop and seen the spyware. Lisa broke down in tears, struggling to understand why she deserved to be treated this way. However, Simon justified his actions, saying they were for her own good. The following day, July 29th, a heated conversation took place between Simon and Lisa, which was later presented in court as evidence. During this conversation, Lisa became emotional and asked if she could go home. In contrast, Simon remained calm and spoke with confidence, assuring her that returning home was not an option. He then told Lisa to calm down and suggested that she had mental issues. On the morning of July 30th, 2011, Lisa woke up early, dressed neatly, and put papers and necessary items in her purse. Before leaving, she locked herself in the bathroom to make a disturbing phone call to her mother. During the call, Lisa said her mother that if anything were to happen to her, her fiancé, Simon, would be responsible. Lisa's intention was to exit the apartment without waking Simon, but she was unsuccessful. The incidents that followed are unclear, and the incident details remain a mystery. However, neighbors reported hearing a scream in the hallway, which stopped abruptly before they could react. Just 1 minute later, a young woman, later confirmed to be Lisa, fell from the balcony of the 15th floor in her fatal crash to the ground below. She landed on the ground, where she died instantly from her severe injuries. Several people on the street saw this happen, but it occurred so quickly that they didn't have time to fully understand the situation. However, one eyewitness, a man who was walking his dog nearby, provided more details. He said that he heard a noise and looked up to see a man holding something large. This man then dropped the object, which turned out to be Lisa. 3 minutes later, Simon, dressed in his pajamas, ran into the street, overcome with tears. He expressed despair about his future, insisting he had been too late to stop Lisa. Initially, the situation seemed like an accident, but Simon swiftly contradicted this assumption, announced that Lisa had ended her own life. Further investigation revealed a cryptic note in Simon's pocket and a disturbing video recording further complicated the situation. After the body Lisa was brought to the morgue and examined, some clues have been found. Upon searching the pockets, investigators found fragments of a torn note containing the message, "There are cameras everywhere in the apartment." It's likely that Lisa had broken the note into small pieces and scattered them across different pockets to prevent Simon from finding them. Further investigation revealed that the apartment indeed had multiple cameras, but the hard drive containing the footage was missing. However, Simon maintained that there were no video recordings at all. A surveillance camera in the apartment's hallway recorded a disturbing scene. Approximately 1 minute before Lisa's fatal fall, the footage shows her desperately running out of the apartment and calling for help. However, Simon quickly grabs her from behind, covers her mouth, and forcibly drags her back inside. This incident is believed to be connected to the scream heard by the neighbors. Investigators also discovered evidence on Simon's laptop, including a recorded conversation he and Lisa had the night before her death, as well as spyware software he used to secretly monitor her activities. Simon stated that he and Lisa had a disagreement that morning, resulting in her becoming hysterical. She initially fled to the hallway, screaming, but he calmed her down by bringing her back inside, fearing a scene in front of the neighbors. Moments later, as Simon was about to call Lisa's mother on the phone, Lisa went out to the balcony and fell. Simon claimed that Lisa once mentioned ending her own life, but he had not taken her threat seriously. He explained that his decision to install spyware was largely driven by his genuine concern for Lisa's well-being and safety. During the trial, Simon was accompanied by his new girlfriend, Rachel Louise, 22 years old, a model who bore a striking resemblance to Lisa. However, it was later suggested that Rachel simply wanted to make a name for herself through this case, so she was willing to talk to the press and appear on television, claiming Simon would never harm a woman. Meanwhile, Simon's lawyers presented a defense that suggested Lisa had a history of mental health struggles, including anxiety and anorexia, for which she had received treatment at a clinic. They imply that these things were the cause of her death. The defense argued that Simon was of short stature, so he could not have lifted Lisa himself, because she was taller than him, thus he would not have been able to throw her off the balcony. However, a trainer from Simon's gym disputed this claim, stating that Simon lifts heavy weights, so he is much stronger than he looks and can easily lift Lisa. This assertion was supported by the absence of Lisa's fingerprints on the railing and glass barrier, suggesting she could not have jumped on her own as she would have needed to lean on them. The physiotherapist who had treated Lisa took the stand, providing crucial testimony about the abuse Lisa had suffered and the items she had left behind in an attempt to escape. This testimony played a crucial role in the trial. As a result, Simon Gidney was convicted of murdering his fiancée, Lisa Harum, and sentenced to 26 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 years. Following the verdict, Rachel Louise became enraged, insulting the judge, and was subsequently removed from the courtroom. Simon and his lawyers made multiple attempts to contest the court's ruling, but they were unsuccessful, and the original verdict stood. Following the verdict, Rachel broke up with Simon. She said in an interview that they found it difficult to maintain a relationship because he was in prison, although she continues to believe in Simon's innocence. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Kenneth Keith. Michael Hawkinsmith, 35, was born in Danville, Kentucky. He was a well-known pastor at a local church where he lived. After working at the church for a long time, he decided to work at a local pawn shop called ABC, while continuing to work as a part-time pastor. After a while, due to the previous owner's health issues, Michael had to take over the entire pawn shop. Being an honest and helpful person, he easily connected with people. In his personal life, Michael was married to Angela, and the two had 2 children together, Andrew and Naomi. Michael and Angela jointly owned the ABC Gold, Games and More pawn shop in Danville, Kentucky. They homeschooled their 9-year-old son Andrew and took care of their newborn daughter Naomi. Andrew often visited his parents' workplace and considered it his playground. However, on the morning of September 20, 2013, the Hawkinsmiths went to the ABC store. The morning went as planned. Dan Smith, a regular at the pawn shop, made a scheduled visit. Smith, known as the Gold Man, was known for buying and selling gold between pawn shops across the state. About 15 minutes after opening, as Michael and Smith were making their transactions, a bearded man entered the store and ordered everyone to get on the ground, followed by horrific events. Andrew, who was at the ABC store at the time, after being instructed by his mother, Angela, to hide, noticed the tense situation and quickly called the police to report the situation. 6 minutes after the alarm call, the police arrived at the scene of the murder. When they entered the building, they found a large trail of blood that led them to Michael Hawkinsmith. They then found his wife, Angela, 38, and another victim, Dan Smith, 60, a broker, on the other side of the counter. All three victims had suffered serious injuries from gunshot wounds to the head and torso. Police later found Andrew, 9, and Naomi, 14 months, hiding in a closet. Andrew and Naomi had been through unimaginable horror and were orphaned, having lost both their parents. When examining the crime scene, police found 14 spent shell casings and 3 intact bullets, along with a briefcase belonging to Dan Smith. Remarkably, the victim's personal belongings and all the cash in the cash register were untouched, suggesting that robbery was not the motive. The case was complicated by the lack of surveillance cameras at the pawn shop. Therefore, police had to search for potential witnesses. An employee of Rainbow Cleaners, a nearby dry cleaner, provided vital information when he described a vehicle that had been parked near the building that morning. The vehicle was a silver pickup truck driven by a large man with a bushy beard. While one team of investigators searched the area, another team had to notify the victims' closest relatives of the tragedy. Michael's parents were devastated by the news. However, they also felt blessed to know that their grandchildren, Andrew and Naomi, had survived. The tragic news reached the daughter of the third victim, Dan Smith. Dan Smith was involved in the purchase of precious metals and was well versed in the specifics of his job, which made it easy for him to find common ground with different people. His business involved handling large amounts of cash, sometimes in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. This led police to suspect that Dan Smith may have been the criminal's primary target. Through surveillance, police discovered that before going to the ABC Gold Games and More pawn shop, Dan Smith had gone to the Lawson Jewelry Store in Harrodsburg, 10 miles northeast of Danville. Inside the jewelry store, investigators found a surveillance camera mounted on the far wall that was monitoring every customer who entered and exited the store. Their goal was to determine if anyone was following Dan Smith. At 8:16 a.m., Dan Smith entered the store, and there were no other customers in the building at the time. Dan Smith was carrying a briefcase identical to the one later found at the ABC Gold Games and More pawn shop. After greeting the woman behind the counter with a smile, he walked toward the back of the store. Moments later, Dan Smith reappeared in the footage, exiting the back of the store, chatting briefly with an elderly woman who had just entered, and then leaving immediately. Footage from the exterior camera did not show anything suspicious. The police could do nothing but monitor the man, unaware that he would soon be at the center of a tragic event. Meanwhile, Andrew Hawkinsmith was brought to the police station to testify. Andrew told the story of how he was at the pawn shop with his parents when Dan Smith came in with a bag full of money. While Michael and Dan were talking, a stranger walked in and demanded the bag of money immediately. According to Andrew, Dan Smith immediately gave the stranger his bag of money. Andrew said that his father asked the man to stop, but the man also shot his father with a handgun similar to the one Andrew often played with. After that, his mother instructed him to take his younger sister, Naomi, to the back of the store and hide in the closet. Andrew picked up his sister and hid. At that moment, the criminal pointed the gun at Angela. The 9-year-old boy thought the reason the stranger did this might be because of the money. The boy described the stranger as a very tall man with a fake-looking blonde beard, which matched the description given by a witness from Rainbow Cleaners. In investigating the case, police thoroughly investigated the business run by the Hawkinsmith family. They discovered that the ABC Gold Games and More pawn shop had a different owner, Steve Devine. Although he usually attended Friday transactions with Dan Smith, he was absent on the morning of September 20th. This information raised concerns, making determining his whereabouts a top priority. Steve Devine explained that he had an allergic reaction that morning and had to cancel all his appointments. His wife confirmed this story. The alibi and the fact that Steve Devine did not own a silver pickup truck helped eliminate him as a suspect. Steve Devine also explained why there were no surveillance cameras in the pawn shop. According to him, the security system had been removed by the previous owner, Kenneth Allen Keith. The new owner had yet to install a replacement. Kenneth Allen Keith, 48, is a pastor like Michael Hawkinsmith. He sold the pawn shop after being diagnosed with brain cancer. However, he is still the owner of another similar establishment, Gold Rush Buyers, in Pulaski County, near Danville's Bowles District. Their friendship began when Michael worked at a church youth camp and lasted 15 years. The Hawkinsmiths respected Pastor Kenneth, and he was like a beloved uncle to Andrew. With no significant leads, investigators decided to search the street surveillance systems near ABC Gold Games and More and other pawn shops. They found a camera on the office building of the real estate company Danville Rentals. Surveillance footage captured a silver pickup truck at 8:45 a.m., but the image was too blurry to determine the license plate or make. However, eyewitness testimony from Rainbow Cleaners helped police identify the vehicle. The witness described the vehicle as an older model with a distinctive square body shape. The vehicle in the video also clearly showed a square rear bumper that matched this description. The color, type, and shape of the vehicle all suggested that police had found the vehicle of the criminal. They continued to search surveillance systems farther and farther away from the pawn shop. Finally, at 8:17 a.m., cameras at the local Ephraim McDowell Hospital captured the same vehicle. Investigators were able to determine that it was a silver Dodge pickup truck. Dan Smith's family was also devastated by the loss of their loved one. Despite their grief, they attended the funeral and held back their anger. In search of more clues, the Danville police asked the public to come forward with any information about the crime or the vehicle involved. On September 24th, the police received a call from Tracy Hurl, a pastor in Warren, Michigan. He claimed to be a friend of Kenneth Keith and said that in their last conversation, they had discussed the Danville murders. At that point, Kenneth seemed to have changed. Pastor Kenneth Allen informed Tracy that on that particular day, he was driving to Danville to pick up medication for his wife. Kenneth also expressed guilt over what had happened, as he had given Michael Hawkinsmith the opportunity to become the owner of his former business. It turned out Kenneth's relationship with the Hawkinsmith family was not what people thought. Tracy recounted that in a conversation with Kenneth said that Michael was a fraud and that Michael had done everything to take over the business from him. These statements aroused suspicion, leading to Kenneth being named a suspect. To verify Kenneth's alibi, investigators decided to review surveillance footage from the Good Neighbor Pharmacy, where Kenneth said he had purchased medication for his wife at 9:24 a.m. According to the surveillance footage, a man entered the pharmacy. It was Kenneth. But just a few minutes earlier, the man was not wearing a green jacket or a beard, which were easily identifiable features of an attacker. However, this did not rule out the possibility that Kenneth was involved in the attack. There was a 6-minute gap between Andrew Hawkinsmith's call to the police and Kenneth's arrival at the pharmacy. the police decided to check whether it was possible to travel from the crime scene to the Good Neighbor Pharmacy in such a short time. They found that the trip took about 5 minutes, so Kenneth could have committed the murder, quickly gotten in the car, and gone to the pharmacy to establish a solid alibi. In addition, the main clue was that Kenneth had an unregistered 2008 Dodge pickup truck, silver in color. However, all the evidence found was circumstantial and not enough to make an arrest. So the investigators asked Tracy Hurl to participate in a series of fake phone calls aimed at Kenneth. Fortunately, Tracy agreed. During these calls, Kenneth finally revealed his true feelings towards the Hawkinsmith family. Everyone had been waiting for this to happen. Kenneth began discussing details of the case that had not been made public. Kenneth said that he was in Danville, but he was at the pharmacy. Kenneth confirmed that he was standing in the pharmacy while all this was happening. Kenneth then explained that he had left Danville and returned to Somerset. He then drove to the car wash to prepare for a planned family vacation. At 10:50 a.m., Kenneth was seen on camera walking down the hallway to the cash register with a noticeable smile. Exterior camera footage covering the parking lot showed Pastor Kenneth leaving the car wash in the same silver Dodge at 11:25 a.m., matching all previous images captured by various surveillance systems in Danville. At that point, they had enough evidence to arrest Kenneth. However, when he was offered a lie detector test to clarify his role in the case, he reacted in an unusual way. He claimed that he would not be able to pass a lie detector test because, during his military service, he had performed some special missions that involved killing a number of people. Investigators then executed a search warrant at Kenneth Allen Keith's pawn shop and discovered some important evidence. They found a fake beard and a significant amount of cash without any legal explanation as to how he had obtained it. In particular, they also found bundles of money wrapped in a ribbon with the name of the bank that issued them, indicating that Dan Smith was a customer. Further investigation revealed that the money found in Keith's pawn shop had recently been withdrawn from the account of a deceased broker. This raised suspicions about Keith's involvement in the case. In addition, investigators also found several .22 caliber shell casings in Keith's pawn shop. After ballistic analysis, they discovered that these casings had been fired from the same type of weapon used to shoot Andrew and Naomi's parents. Kenneth Allen Keith was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and robbery. He believed that Michael Hawkinsmith and Steve Dine were conspiring to remove him from the business. However, there was no evidence that Michael Hawkinsmith and Steve Dine were involved in any conspiracy. When Kenneth met Dan Smith at the pawn shop, he tried to create a fake plan to make the police think that the case was a robbery. However, the plan failed when the police investigated and found no evidence of suspicious activities by Michael Hawkinsmith and Steve Dine. On September 20th, Kenneth arrived in Danville in his silver Dodge Caravan. He circled the pawn shop until he saw Dan Smith's car parked nearby. Kenneth then killed Dan Smith, Michael Hawkinsmith, and Angela Hawkinsmith. After taking all the cash, Kenneth calmly left the crime scene and stopped at the Good Neighbor Pharmacy, which was captured on surveillance cameras, creating a false alibi. Kenneth's decision to have his car washed appears to have been another attempt to remove any evidence that might have been left on the car. Prior to sentencing, in 2017, Kenneth Allen Keith pleaded guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Leanne Tiernan. Leanne Tiernan was born on September 27, 1984, to Michael Tiernan and Sharon Hawkhead in Bramley. Although her parents divorced shortly after her birth, Leanne remained close to her father. She and her older sister, Michelle, lived with their mother in Leeds, but their father continued to play an active role in their lives. Leanne was also very fond of her grandparents and would often accompany them to church on Sunday mornings. She had a sweet tooth and was affectionately nicknamed Chocolate Chip Niece by an uncle. Leanne was a student at West Leeds High School. She had been diligently studying for her GCSEs. A day out with her best friend, 15-year-old Sarah Whitehouse, was a fun holiday. They planned to go to Leeds for some early Christmas shopping. On Sunday, November 26, 2000, after going to church with her grandmother, Leanne returned home to prepare for an outing with Sarah. She wears a black and white ribbed turtleneck sweater, black pants, and black ankle boots over a blue jacket. She styled her hair in her favorite French style, kissed her mother, and set off to meet Sarah. Leanne and Sarah took a bus to downtown Leeds and spent the afternoon shopping. By late afternoon, they finished their work and boarded the bus back to Bramley. At about 4:50 p.m., they got out of the car and walked to Sarah's house and parted ways. Sarah watched Leanne walk towards Howley Gill, a public footpath that was a shortcut to her house. Even though the path was unlit and went through a wooded area, Leanne felt safe walking because it was still light out. It should have only taken Leanne 20 minutes to get home, but when Sarah called Leanne's house at 5:20 p.m. to chat, she was surprised to hear that Leanne hadn't come home yet. Sharon kept calling Leanne's mobile phone, but she did not answer. At 7 p.m., Sharon reported Leanne missing to the local police station. West Yorkshire Police, led by Detective Superintendent Chris Gregg, launched a large-scale search operation. The terrain is challenging, with more than 700 homes, vacant lots, woods, canals, drainage shafts, and wells to search. The police are determined to find Leanne and bring her home safely. They used helicopters, uniformed police, and search dogs to scour the area, going from house to house. To preserve any potential evidence, trash collection in the area has been suspended. A week later, despite their best efforts, there was still no sign of Leanne. Investigators reconstructed her final activities with the help of her sister Michelle and close friend Sarah. As the investigation unfolded, several witnesses came forward claiming to have seen a suspicious man walking his black and tan dog in the Howley Gill area just an hour before Leanne got off the bus on her way home. The police created a composite sketch of the man, describing him as 5 feet 8 inches with a stocky build, round face, and possible scarring. He was seen wearing a black beanie, a long waterproof coat, and dirty jeans. Police have released this information to the public. As the investigation stalled, the case began to go cold. However, the public continues to show support for Leanne's family, doing everything they can to make her story known. Dad of 3 from Leeds, Sean Clark, even offered a £10,000 reward for any information that could lead to Leanne's safe return. Additionally, Iceland Foods, a supermarket chain, printed Leanne's picture and details on their milk cartons nationwide. As the months passed, investigators searched more than 2,000 homes and outbuildings along Leanne's route home from the shopping district. The police still haven't found Leanne. Her loved ones always hoped that one day she would return home. But 9 months after her disappearance, on August 20, 2001, a man named Mark Bisson was walking his dog in Lindley Woods, a forest near North Yorkshire, when he stumbled upon a mysterious discovery. Initially, it appeared to be a pile of rubbish, but as he looked closer, he discovered a floral duvet wrapped in twine. When removing the rope, Bisson found a body wrapped in 9 large garbage bags. The police were called, and they carefully removed the blanket and bag to reveal the body of a fully clothed young girl. The body was found with its hands bound behind its back with 3 yellow cable ties, and a leather dog collar was tightly secured around its neck. Underneath the black garbage bag covering its head, investigators discovered the decomposing face of a young woman. Using fingerprints, they were able to identify the body as Leanne Tiernan. An autopsy later confirmed that Leanne had been strangled to death with a plastic cable tie. The investigation shifted from a missing persons case to a murder inquiry. Authorities believe the killer was likely a local resident. Two key pieces of evidence support this theory. Leanne's body was found just 16 miles from where she was last seen, and the yellow cable used to bind her hands is commonly used by the British postal system, especially Royal Mail or Parcel Force. The green garbage bags used to wrap Leanne's body were identified as coming from Morrison's, a popular grocery store chain with 2 locations in the area. Investigators collected DNA samples from Leanne's family members, friends, and known sex offenders in the area, hoping to find a match. In addition, a thorough search of the bushland area where Leanne's body was buried was conducted. The investigation into Leanne's death was ongoing, but one thing puzzled detectives: her body was found in an area that had been thoroughly searched before, and it didn't show the usual signs of decomposition after 9 months. Her hair was still styled in the same ponytail with the same hair tie and clip she had when she went missing. The medical examiner's analysis of her cardiac tissue revealed that Leanne was killed on the day she was kidnapped, and her body was stored in a cold environment for months. The killer attempted to dispose of her body by leaving it in a common dump area, wrapped in a duvet, a few weeks before it was discovered. Although the killer tried to hide the body, he accidentally saved a significant amount of forensic evidence and DNA. However, when authorities analyzed the body, they were disappointed to find no DNA evidence of the killer. They then turned their attention to investigating the items found with Leanne's body, hoping to find clues that will help them catch the killer. The investigation found dog hair on Leanne's clothes, leading police to attempt to create a DNA profile of the dog in the hope of identifying the killer. The dog hair was sent to a Texas university that specializes in DNA profiling of purebred pets. Although the university was able to obtain a partial DNA profile, they were unable to match it to a specific dog, so analysis was stopped. A knitted scarf was found around Leanne's neck containing knotted human hair. The hair was submitted for DNA testing, and a DNA profile was successfully created from the small amount of DNA found inside the hair shaft. The police then turned their attention to the dog collar that had been used to wrap a black bin liner around Leanne's neck. The collar was found to have been manufactured by a company called Armitage Leather Products, based in Nottingham. Detectives hoped that if the killer had purchased the dog collar from them, they might be able to obtain his name or address. The police reached out to the manufacturer and requested sales records. After analyzing these documents, investigators contacted more than 220 wholesalers across the UK. Their 112th inquiry proved successful. They contacted a company called Pet Pajamas, based in Liverpool, which revealed that it had sold 3 of the distinctive dog collars in question. Pet Pajamas provided investigators with details of the 3 customers who had bought these items. The detectives started investigating the customers and soon identified a prime suspect, John Taylor from Bramley, near the area where Leanne was last seen. Taylor's name had previously come up during the investigation when Leanne's body was found. At the time, witnesses reported that Taylor was frequently seen in the woods with his dog. By the time investigators prepared to question Taylor, he had already stated that his dog had passed away before Leanne's murder, sparking suspicion that he may have deliberately killed his pet to conceal evidence. At first glance, John Taylor seemed like a regular person. He was a 45-year-old man working as a delivery driver for Parcel Force, a division of the Royal Mail. He had no serious criminal history except for one instance when he stole a suit as a 15-year-old. He was previously married, with the couple having 2 children, a son in 1981 and a daughter in 1983, before they got a divorce in 1996. He appeared to be living a solitary and unassuming life in a modest house on Cockshot Drive, Bramley, Leeds. Taylor's neighbors consider him a normal person, but he enjoys causing pain to animals. He would hunt and torture rabbits, stab foxes, and bludgeon pheasants to death. In 1982, Taylor started breeding dogs and ferrets at his home on Cockshot Drive, which led to a buildup of animal waste. The smell eventually became unbearable for his wife, Janet, who had always taken pride in their home. Janet could no longer tolerate the situation and filed for divorce. Taylor frequently traveled around the country, not for work but to meet women he had contacted online. He often uses the internet to find female friends online and often has sex with them. Investigators later tracked down some of these women through Taylor's phone records and interviewed them. While most described him as harmless, some admitted to having called the police to report him as a suspect after the discovery of Leanne's body. Two women, in particular, described Taylor as someone who enjoyed violence during intimate encounters. He even told one woman that he had a desire to have sex with her daughter. A former girlfriend of Taylor's ended their relationship due to his fascination with bondage. She reported that Taylor would restrain her hands with cable ties and cover her face with scarves. When questioned by investigators, she described Taylor's method of restraint, which involved using a bundle of cable ties stored in his bedside drawer. He would bind her wrists with 2 cable ties and then connect them behind her back with a 3rd tie. This technique was eerily similar to the way Leanne's body was found, and the details had not been publicly disclosed. 10 months after Leanne's disappearance, Taylor was arrested and brought in for questioning. A warrant was issued for his DNA and a search of his property. The police immediately cordoned off his house on Cockshot Drive and conducted a thorough search of the premises. In the backyard, they discovered a hedge plant, a plum tree, and a poplar tree. Pollen from these plants was found on Leanne's hair, skin, and nasal tract, indicating that she had been at the location before her death. During the search, police excavated the garden and found the remains of various animals, including 28 ferrets buried in a mass grave and the skeletons of 4 dogs. One of the dogs, a tan and black terrier, had a crushed skull. It is possible that Taylor killed his dog to conceal his identity after learning that the police were looking for a suspect with a dog. Forensic tests revealed that the hairs found on Leanne's body matched those of the tan and black terrier. Investigators gathered crucial evidence linking Taylor to Leanne's murder inside the house. A closer examination of the floorboards revealed paint carpet fibers caught on nails, which matched the fibers found on Leanne's body. Additionally, a blood stain belonging to Leanne was discovered under the floorboards. The twine used to tie the bin liners around Leanne's body was identified as part of a unique batch produced by a manufacturer in Devon, specifically designed for making rabbit-catching nets. A matching batch was found in Taylor's home. Further investigation revealed a stash of yellow zip ties in Taylor's house, which were manufactured by an Italian company exclusively for the Royal Mail. As Taylor worked for Parcel Force, a division of Royal Mail, it was easy for him to obtain these ties. A nail in John's kitchen had the same type of garbage bag wrapped around it, adding to the evidence. 3 large freezers were also found on the property, although their significance was not immediately clear. Initially, Taylor denied knowing Leanne or being involved in her murder. However, when giving evidence, Taylor admitted to kidnapping Leanne but insisted her death was an accident. He claimed that Leanne died from a fall that hit her head. According to investigators, Leanne's death did not occur as a result of a fall, as claimed by Taylor. In reality, Taylor attacked Leanne from behind while she was walking alone on the unlit path of Holly Gill. There were no eyewitnesses, but a stifled scream was reported. Investigators concluded that Taylor then strangled Leanne and bound her hands with cable ties, resulting in her death. In 2002, John Taylor, 46, was found guilty of murdering and kidnapping Leanne. He received 2 life sentences and will be eligible for parole after 20 years. After his conviction, investigators discovered that Taylor had committed previous crimes. Once his DNA was added to the police database, they matched him to 2 old assault cases. One assault occurred on October 18, 1988. A 32-year-old woman was attacked while walking to pick up her kids from school on Holly Gill. Taylor was masked and carried a knife. Another attack happened on March 1, 1989, when Taylor entered a Bramley house through force, masked and with a knife. He dragged a 21-year-old mother into her bedroom and attacked her. He also stripped, blindfolded, and gagged her while her 18-month-old daughter cried in the next room. The investigation into Leanne's murder showed a clear calculation in the disposal of her body. After her murder, Taylor kept her body in his kitchen freezer. In the years following Leanne's case, police conducted a nationwide review of similar cold cases. In 2018, the full extent of John Taylor's heinous crimes came to light when he confessed to a series of vile acts committed against 5 women between 1977 and 1996. One of these incidents involved holding a knife to the throat of a pregnant woman and forcing her to perform a degrading act. Another incident occurred in 1977, just before Christmas, when he assaulted a barmaid. Taylor pleaded guilty to these attacks and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is currently serving his sentence at Wakefield Prison, a maximum security facility notorious for housing infamous and violent offenders. Many questions remain about the extent of Taylor's crimes, including how many more murders and assaults he may have committed and how far back his crimes date. It is also unclear how he managed to evade capture for so long. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Alicia Canales McGuire. Alicia was born on October 29, 1992, in Mount Vernon, Washington, to Manuel and Michelle Canales. Her passion was helping others, which led her to work as a caregiver for most of her adult life. Growing up on a farm, Alicia learned the value of hard work from a young age. Starting to work at just 5 years old, she often returned to the family farm to lend a hand. Spending time with her family was crucial to Alicia, and she made it a point to regularly visit and call them, always remembering to express her love when saying goodbye. Alicia lived in Birdsview with her husband Bradle. Alicia lived in the house her sister Amanda's home, where Amanda lived with her 3 children. When Amanda had to travel to New York for work, she asked Alicia to watch her kids during her absence. Alicia was happy to help care for her nephew and nieces. One night, a nanny staying in the house with her called 911 after waking up to the sound of gunshots. When the nanny went downstairs, she found Alicia lying motionless at the front door. The police officers who arrived at the scene first secured the house to ensure the perpetrator was not still inside. They carefully checked every room, confirming that only the nanny and the children were present. Once the children were safely removed from the house, the police began searching for evidence. A car was parked in front of the house, with shell casings nearby, indicating that the shooter had stood next to the car right before the front door. Several bullets had hit the door frame, and Alicia's body was lying face down just outside the door. The police found no signs of a robbery, as the house was not in disarray, and it appeared that the perpetrator had not entered the house at all. The detectives were left wondering who would want to kill Alicia and why. When they discovered that the crime scene was her sister's house, they considered the possibility of mistaken identity. Maybe Amanda, Alicia's sister, was the intended target, but she was safely in New York at the time. The investigators turned to the nanny, who was also in the house during the shooting, for answers. After calming down, she was able to provide some information. She told them that she was upstairs when she heard the gunshots, and when she looked down, she saw Alicia lying face down on the floor, motionless. Unfortunately, she didn't see the shooter. She mentioned that Amanda, Alicia's sister, had issues with her ex-husband, Kevin Lewis. Upon reviewing reports from the local sheriff's office, the detectives discovered that this was not the first call to the address, with all previous incidents related to domestic disputes between Amanda and Kevin Lewis. The detectives focus on this particular testimony. They located Kevin Lewis's home address in another part of Everett and paid him a visit before dawn. His house was dark, and when they knocked on the door, Kevin answered. During their conversation, The officers asked if he knew where his ex-wife was, and he replied that she should be at home. Appearing disheveled as if he had just woken up, the detectives asked Kevin to account for his whereabouts the previous night. He claimed to have stayed at home and stated that his sister and mother could vouch for his alibi. Notably, he didn't ask why the detectives were visiting him. When detectives told Kevin that a shooting had occurred at the house where his children lived, he showed no emotional response, which was unusual. As a parent, he should have asked about his children's well-being, but he remained silent. However, when they informed him that Amanda was out of town on business, he expressed surprise, saying "Really?" and the conversation ended there. The detectives decided to investigate further by reviewing footage from surveillance cameras at neighboring houses. They wanted to verify Kevin's alibi that he had stayed home all night. They saw a car stopped near Kevin's driveway about 40 minutes before the attack on Alicia. A person resembling Kevin then exited the house, got into the car, and drove away a few moments later. Although the footage was not clear enough to confirm it was definitely Kevin, the detectives continued to review additional camera footage. They took a closer look at the car, but that didn't help identify it. All they could determine was that it was a light-colored vehicle. They fast-forwarded the recording and saw the car return about 20 minutes later. This time, they noticed a crucial detail. The front right rim was different from the others. While the three other rims were light in color, the front right one was dark. The car stopped near Kevin Lewis's house, and the same person who had gotten out of the car earlier got out again and went back inside. Whoever this person was, they entered the house about 20 minutes before the 911 calls about a shooting started coming in. After that, the car left and didn't come back. Since it was a 15-minute drive from Kevin's house to Amanda's house, it's possible that the car had enough time to get to Amanda's place. However, it was too early to say whether this car was involved in the shooting at all. Amanda found out about her sister's death a few hours later, when their father called her in New York to break the news. When investigators asked Amanda, a key witness, if she thought her ex-husband Kevin was responsible for Alicia's murder, she was adamant that he was the one. Although Amanda's 8-year marriage to Kevin Lewis ended, she struggled to acknowledge the toxic nature of their relationship. Despite their divorce in June 2017, Amanda lived in fear of Kevin, who had physically abused her in the past, leaving her with bruises. After their separation, Kevin continued to threaten her. In August 2017, Amanda was granted full custody of their 3 young children, and Kevin was ordered to provide $800 in monthly support instead of child support. This marked a fresh start for Amanda, who focused on rebuilding her life in Everett, Washington, and was grateful for the support of her family as a single mother. Kevin, a former military man, threatened to kill Amanda, and she took him seriously due to his training. Believing she was the target, Amanda obtained a restraining order against Kevin, but he violated it multiple times. He would often lurk around her house, peeking through the windows, which terrified not only Amanda, but also her 3 children. Despite the violations, Kevin was never charged by the police. Weeks before her sister's tragic death, Amanda was brutally beaten in her own driveway. She was getting out of her car late one night when someone launched a surprise attack. Although the assault happened quickly and she didn't see the attacker's face, Amanda was convinced that Kevin was behind it. Investigators believe 30-year-old Kevin Lewis is the prime suspect in the murder of Alicia. They think he intended to kill his ex-wife, but he was unaware that she was in New York at the time. Unbeknownst to him, Amanda had asked Alicia to babysit her children while she was away. However, there's a problem with this theory. If Kevin was the person in the footage, it would mean he was at his home during the shooting. Moreover, his sister and mother have provided him with a solid alibi. As a result, the police have continued their investigation, exploring alternative explanations for the crime. They returned to Amanda's house to re-examine the crime scene and track the path of the bullets. The investigation revealed that Alicia was shot when the door was only partially open. The shooter fired at least 7 shots from outside the house, which entered the interior. The evidence suggests that the shooter stood next to the garage and fired, then moved towards the door and fired again from inside. The medical examiner determined that Alicia died from multiple gunshot wounds to the head and torso, with 5 shots hitting her. 2 of the wounds showed signs of gunpowder residue, indicating close-range shots. While the examiner couldn't determine the exact order of the 5 shots, they believe the last 2 head wounds were likely the final 2 inflicted. Furthermore, experts concluded that the 7 shell casings found at the scene came from the same gun. Alicia's head wounds were caused by close-range bullet shots. The investigators explored the possibility of a personal motive behind her murder, but found no evidence to support this theory. The shell casings discovered at the crime scene were a rare Russian-made brand called Tul Ammo, which gave the police hope of tracing the seller and buyer. The police learned that Walmart had sold the 9mm Tul Ammo cartridges and had CCTV footage of the purchase. Upon reviewing the footage recorded 2 days before Alicia's death, they initially suspected Kevin Lewis as the buyer. However, the footage revealed a different person who paid using a credit card. The police identified this individual, but found no connection to Kevin Lewis, Alicia, or the nanny. The investigation thus required new leads and evidence. Amanda was questioned by investigators about her relationship with Kevin. She revealed that their relationship started well, but Kevin eventually became aggressive and violent, leading to their divorce, a restraining order, and Amanda gaining full custody of their children. Despite this, Amanda believed that she was the intended target of the shooting that killed Alicia, not Alicia herself. She suspected that Lewis had orchestrated the attack, but investigators knew that Kevin was at home at the time of the shooting. Upon re-examining the footage from the night of Alicia's death, investigators noticed something they had previously overlooked. The low-quality recording showed Kevin leaving his house and getting into the back seat of a car behind the driver. This raised questions, as most people would typically sit in the front passenger seat. The likely explanation was that someone else was already sitting in the front passenger seat, meaning there were probably 2 people in the car by the time it arrived at Kevin's house. This new evidence didn't directly link Kevin to Alicia's death, but it did contribute to the growing case against him for attacking his ex-wife Amanda. In November 2018, Kevin was arrested and later sentenced to 3 years in prison. Over a year had passed since Alicia's tragic death, yet her case remained a mystery. However, a breakthrough finally came in 2019 when the police station received a crucial call from a woman with vital information. The caller claimed to have met a girl named Angelica at a party in nearby Spokane, who boasted about being hired to commit a murder on York Road, the same road where Alicia was fatally shot. Although the police were initially skeptical, given the significant distance of 5 hours between Spokane and Everett. According to the caller, Angelica had proudly shared details about how she and her boyfriend were involved in the crime. Alexis Hale, alias Angelica, claimed a woman was fatally shot in the head, saying the killer was hired by the children's father and mistakenly targeted the wrong person. Police were interested in her detailed knowledge of the case. They discovered her true identity, found social media photos of her with a 9mm pistol, and videos featuring her boyfriend, Jadon Phelps. A video posted by Alexis on the night of the murder helped investigators pinpoint her location, about 10 minutes from Kevin Lewis's house. Jadon boasted about a large sum of money on social media, leading police to discover his connection to Kevin through his aunt. With this evidence, they made an arrest. The first person to be taken into custody was Alexis Hale, who protested loudly, claiming she was only 17 and couldn't be arrested. However, she knew why she was being arrested and demanded a lawyer. Police arrested Jadon Phelps, analyzing his and Hale's phone records. showing they drove from Spokane to Everett to commit the shooting. Security footage from Lewis's neighbors revealed someone in a white top leaving and returning around the time of the crime. Lewis was wearing a white top when questioned. Phelps, in custody, revealed Kevin Lewis hired him and Hale and led police through the crime scene, pointing out the door and corner. He stood where he was positioned during the crime, reenacting the events, and admitted to shooting at the door when it opened slightly, then firing 2 more shots before fleeing. Kevin Lewis was already in jail for a crime when he was arrested and charged with aggravated murder with a firearm, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation to commit murder in connection with the September 2017 death of Alicia. In July 2020, 20-year-old Phelps pleaded guilty to premeditated first-degree murder and was sentenced to 31 years in prison. His co-defendant, 18-year-old Hale, also pleaded guilty to the same charge and received a 15-year sentence. During the trial, Phelps testified that he committed the crime for financial gain and to increase his reputation on the streets. He used the money Lewis paid him to get tattoos, purchase a pair of Timberland boots, and buy a Ferragamo belt buckle. Phelps claimed that his former girlfriend had obtained the gun used in the crime from a family member, and he had given her $200. Lewis pleaded not guilty and faced trial. Prosecutors alleged he paid $2,400 to his cousin and girlfriend to kill his ex-wife, but they mistakenly targeted Alicia. Lewis directed them to the address, claiming he didn't know the target. Phelps and Hale exited their vehicle, with Phelps stopping near the garage and Hale knocking on the door. As Alicia opened it, Phelps fired multiple shots, eventually walking up to the porch, and they fled. They returned, fearing they left a glove, but saw police and drove away. Finally, Judge Thompson also ordered Lewis to no longer have any contact with his ex-wife, his children, and Phelps and Hale for the rest of his life. Records indicate that he remains incarcerated at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla County. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Michelle Young. Michelle Marie Young, born in February 1977 in New York, grew up with her younger sister Meredith, with whom she was extremely close. Their mother, Linda, devoted significant time to her daughters, encouraging their development and nurturing their talents. Michelle was drawn to law and economics from an early age, hoping to pursue a career in these fields. After high school, she applied to several universities and was accepted into a prominent institution in North Carolina's capital. At the university, Michelle excelled in her economics and law studies, earning a master's degree. Upon graduation, she landed a prestigious position at a leading accounting firm in the state. Michelle's career flourished, earning a good income and making ambitious plans for her future. To celebrate her 24th birthday, she gathered with friends and colleagues at a popular local venue. During the celebration, a stranger accidentally knocked a cocktail out of Michelle's hands. The apologetic stranger, Jason Young, offered to buy her another drink. As they conversed, Jason's charming and witty nature caught Michelle's attention. He asked her out on a date, and Michelle, feeling a spark, accepted, believing their encounter was meant to be. After they started talking, they discovered they had a lot in common. Both had attended the same university, with Jason graduating 3 years earlier. They shared a love for the same hockey team and music group. Their mutual interests quickly blossomed into a romantic relationship, but living together or getting married was not an option at that point. Jason still lived with his parents in Brevard and would only visit Michelle in Raleigh on weekends or meet her during business trips to the state capital. During one of these visits, Michelle surprised Jason with the news that she was pregnant. This revelation shocked both of them, as they weren't ready to become parents. They were focused on their careers, making progress, and hadn't planned on starting a family yet. Jason immediately accepted the situation, but Michelle was unsure at first, eventually deciding to keep the baby and not have an abortion. It took Jason about a month to come to terms with the news. after which he relocated to Raleigh to be close to Michelle, who was now pregnant. A few months later, they got married, but not because of romantic feelings or the pregnancy itself. The real reason was that Michelle lacked health insurance, and having a child would have been extremely costly without it. Marriage provided a solution, allowing them to avoid these expenses. Michelle gave birth to her daughter, Cassidy Elizabeth, in the spring of 2004. As a newlywed, Michelle dedicated herself to domestic life and family responsibilities, with the help of her mother and younger sister. Although Michelle's family initially had reservations about Jason, they made an effort to avoid conflicts and accept him. Later that year, the young family moved into a large house in a quiet, landscaped area of the city. During her visits, Michelle's mother, Linda, noticed that there was tension within the family. Jason had a volatile temper, and Michelle constantly worked to resolve their disputes and present a united front in public, pretending to be a happy wife and mother. Only her mother, Linda, knew the truth about their relationship. An ominous sign came when Cassidy was just 2 years old. Michelle became pregnant again. She tentatively shared the news with Jason, but he surprisingly reacted with calmness and even seemed happy about it. The family drove to Brevard to share the good news with Jason's parents. They visited for the weekend, celebrating with relatives on the first day. The next day, they left their young daughter with her grandparents for a few hours and went to a restaurant to celebrate together. On their way home, Jason, who was driving, overcorrected and oversteered, causing the car to go off the road and into a ravine. Although they were shaken and had some scrapes and bruises, they were not seriously injured. However, the shock of the accident caused Michelle to miscarry, which left her deeply worried. Jason's calm reaction to the accident, the loss of their child, and his apparent indifference to his wife's distress seemed suspicious. In hindsight, Linda Fisher would later consider the accident a bad omen that they had ignored at the time. They had a friend named Michelle Manny from their university days. After losing touch for a while, Jason ran into her during a work trip in the spring of 2006. He told his wife about the encounter, and they decided to invite Michelle over for a visit. Michelle accepted the invitation and opened up about her unhappy marriage and relationship issues. She constantly praised Jason, telling his wife how lucky she was to have him. Although Michelle noticed Michelle's flirting behavior, she genuinely wanted to comfort and support her friend. However, Jason saw this as an opportunity to take their friendship to the next level. He had always been flirtatious, but this time, his interactions with Michelle quickly escalated beyond friendly support. They started calling each other almost daily and secretly meeting up. Jason would justify his absence by saying he was on business trips, and his wife remained unaware of what was really going on. In the summer of 2006, Michelle told her husband Jason that she was pregnant again. However, this time, Jason was unhappy about the news. Michelle was confused and felt distant from her husband, but she attributed this to the miscarriage they had experienced a few months prior. Unbeknownst to Michelle, Jason was secretly contemplating how to end their marriage with minimal personal consequences. In early November, when Michelle was 5 months pregnant, Jason went on a business trip, driving 300 miles from home and booking a hotel room halfway through his journey. That evening, Michelle had a lengthy phone conversation with her best friend, discussing their marital problems and revealing that she had a significant argument with Jason the night before he left. After talking to her, she went upstairs, put her daughter to bed, and then fell asleep beside her around 10 p.m. Meanwhile, Jason arrived at the hotel, claiming he was exhausted from the journey, and went straight to his room to rest. However, his real intention was to carefully observe the hotel's entrances, exits, and security cameras, plotting how to sneak out and back in without being detected. He was working on creating a foolproof alibi for what he believed would be the perfect crime. In the early morning hours, Young called his sister-in-law, Meredith, for assistance. He explained that he wanted to surprise his wife, Michelle, with a piece of jewelry for their wedding anniversary, but he had accidentally sent the order confirmation to their home fax machine. He was worried that Michelle would see the surprise and asked Meredith to help him retrieve the fax. Meredith, despite her dislike for her son-in-law, agreed to help. When she arrived at Michelle's house, she entered through a secret door in the garage, which was always left unlocked and known only to family members. The house was eerily quiet, and Meredith found Michelle's personal belongings, including her papers, keys, and wallet, in the hallway, suggesting that she hadn't left the house. Meredith then went upstairs and called out to her sister and niece, but there was no response. As she entered the bedroom, Meredith was met with a horrific scene. Michelle lay lifeless on the floor, her skull severely fractured, surrounded by a pool of her own blood. The walls, furniture, and floor were covered in blood, with bloody footprints from the baby nearby. Sadly, Michelle had been dead for hours, and nothing could be done to help her. Cassidy's sister quickly called emergency services when she heard a strange noise coming from under the bed. When she looked, she saw Cassidy staring back at her in confusion. Despite being shaken, Cassidy was unharmed. It became clear that she had witnessed her mother's death and had stayed by her body for hours, as evidenced by the floor marks and the toys she had brought to her mother. Further investigation revealed that Michelle's body bore the signs of a brutal and prolonged beating, with numerous bruises, abrasions, and fractures. Her teeth had been knocked out, and her skull was fractured by a heavy, blunt object that was never recovered. A bloody pillow lay nearby, suggesting that the killer had used it to smother the victim. The lack of stolen items and absence of forced entry or broken locks suggested that the perpetrator's sole intention was murder, and that they must have had a key or known about the secret door, which was only known to family members. The main suspect in the case was the husband of the deceased, but he claimed to have a solid alibi. He said he checked into his hotel room in the evening and didn't leave until morning, when he attended a scheduled business meeting. An investigation confirmed that he used his room key card to enter and exit his room. However, further investigation revealed several inconsistencies. For instance, a hotel employee found that the emergency exit door had been propped open with a cobblestone to prevent it from slamming shut. The surveillance camera that monitored this door had been intentionally disabled on the night of the murder. In fact, it stopped recording around half an hour after the suspect checked into his room. Furthermore, a man resembling the suspect was seen getting gas at a station between the hotel and the crime scene. When asked to provide identification, he refused and quickly left the station without waiting for change. The gas station attendant later identified the suspect, but he continued to deny any involvement, claiming he had stayed in his hotel room all night. On the eve of the tragedy, Jason Young made over 24 calls to Michelle, followed by 5 brief calls to his mistress, each lasting no more than 15 seconds. This suggests that Jason may have been panicking. Notably, all these calls were made outside the hotel, despite his claim of having stayed there all night. Additionally, Jason was late for a scheduled business meeting with his partners and appeared confused. While these events are suspicious, they do not provide conclusive evidence, individually or collectively, to prove that Jason Young was responsible for the brutal murder of his pregnant wife. For nearly 3 years, Jason lived a normal life, even gaining custody of his young daughter, a devastating blow to his late wife's relatives. During this time, he began openly dating Mani, a friend of his deceased wife Michelle, which only fueled suspicion that he was responsible for her brutal murder. Jason was finally arrested in 2009, but the initial trial ended in a mistrial due to a hung jury, despite substantial evidence pointing to his guilt. However, the case was reopened in 2012 after new evidence emerged, including eyewitness testimony placing Jason near a hotel on the night of the murder. Crucial pieces of evidence included sightings of his distinctive white car parked near his home in a dark lot on the night of the crime. Additionally, A child psychologist testified about Jason's daughter Cassidy's disturbing doll play, in which she demonstrated her father hitting her mother, then not getting up off the floor. Manny testified in court, revealing that Jason had an affair with her, but claimed that Jason was miserable in his marriage, as he had told everyone. Another of Jason's former mistresses testified that she was frightened of his violent outbursts when he lost control. After a lengthy trial, Jason Young was found guilty of brutally assaulting his pregnant wife and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jason filed his first appeal in 2014, but it was denied. In 2018, he requested a review of his case, but the State Court of Appeals again denied it. Cassidy, the daughter of Jason's murdered wife, was left without her parents. Her father is in prison for the crime, and she is now being raised by her aunt and maternal grandparents. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Alicia Ross. Alicia Ross was born on February 8, 1980, in Markham, Ontario, Canada, to biological parents who relinquished their rights to the child. She was adopted by Marvin and Sharon Ross, who provided her with love and care. Despite her adoptive parents' divorce, they maintained a friendly relationship and continued to support Alicia. Alicia excelled in school, particularly in drawing and photography. She had a passion for traveling and exploring new cities and countries. After finishing school, she spent a year in Australia before returning home and enrolling in university. In the summer of 2005, Alicia went on a hiking trip in the mountains where she met her boyfriend, Sean Hine. On August 16th, Alicia went for a walk in the park with her adoptive mother and their dogs. She seemed happy and shared that she was expecting a promotion at work to the position of senior sales manager. Alicia was proud of her achievement and expressed her desire to introduce Sean to her adoptive parents. That evening, Alicia and Sean went on a date, and after returning home, they had a great time together. Around midnight, Sean left Alicia's house, promising to call her as soon as he got home. When he called around midnight, Alicia didn't pick up the phone. Sean wasn't overly concerned, thinking she had simply fallen asleep. Sean tried to call Alicia again the next morning, but when she didn't answer, he began to worry. Unbeknownst to him, Alicia had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a mysterious disappearance that would puzzle investigators and her family for years to come. When Alicia didn't pick up, Sean became genuinely worried and contacted a mutual acquaintance who worked in the same office as Ross. From him, Sean learned that Alicia hadn't come to work, and he immediately rushed to her house on the morning of August 17th. Sharon and Julius, Alicia's parents, were planning to play golf with friends and left the house around 10 a.m. They noticed Alicia's car in the driveway, but thought little of it, assuming a colleague had picked her up. About half an hour later, Sean arrived at the Ross residence and found no sign of Alicia. He called the police to report her missing and also contacted Sharon, informing her of the situation. The police were already present when Sharon and Julius arrived home, alarmed by the news. Sean was the first person to notice Alicia's disappearance and inform the authorities. Moreover, he was the last person to see her alive and well the evening before she vanished. According to him, they had said goodbye at the gate where his car was parked around midnight, and she hadn't been in touch since then. When Sharon approached Alicia's room, she immediately noticed that all her daughter's personal belongings, without which she never left the house, were in their places. Her purse, passport, driver's license, keys, cell phone, bank cards, and cash were all left in the room, indicating she wouldn't have gone anywhere, let alone left without them. The gate was open, but not forced, suggesting that the missing person either let her abductor in herself or willingly left with someone. In the backyard, the police found some disorder. The lawn and flowers were trampled as if someone had fallen there. A pair of cigarettes and the right sandal of the girl, which she had been wearing the evening before, were found on the ground, laid out in a straight line. Neither Alicia nor her parents smoked, so the cigarettes didn't belong to them, and Sean claimed he never smoked that particular brand. Sean was almost immediately considered the prime suspect. Firstly, he was noticeably nervous, and his account seemed somewhat confused and disjointed. Secondly, he was the first to report Alicia's disappearance to the police, even before speaking with her parents and confirming that they too had not seen her. Additionally, law enforcement found biological traces on the girl's bed belonging to both her and Sean. Based on this, the investigation speculated that Alicia might have denied Sean intimacy, and he decided to force her, then trying to cover his tracks and stage her disappearance, which he likely caused by ending her life. When Sean was brought to the station, questioned, and the investigator's theory presented to him, he was stunned. He was dismayed to be the prime suspect and swore he would never harm his girlfriend, as he loved her. He also admitted that they did indeed have intimate moments that evening, but insisted it was consensual. The missing girl's parents also had nothing bad to say about Sean. He hadn't argued with their daughter, hadn't mistreated her, and she spoke only well of him. Their relationship was progressing rapidly and quite happily, so much so that Alicia even hoped to have a future with him. The police were baffled by the disappearance of a young woman, Alicia, who had no reason to leave her life behind. She was awaiting a promotion at her job and was a responsible person, so it was unlikely she would just vanish without a word. If something unexpected had happened, she would have contacted her parents. Yet, she had left without her documents, money, and phone. The police questioned her boyfriend Sean, but lacked enough evidence to detain him. They didn't rule him out as a suspect, though, and kept an eye on him. Sean seemed depressed and upset, and the massive search effort began the day after Alicia's disappearance. The police thoroughly inspected her home and yard, questioned neighbors, and examined the surrounding area. However, no one reported seeing or hearing anything suspicious that night. The police theorized that Alicia vanished between midnight and sunrise, a time when the streets are usually quiet. Flyers with Alicia's photo were distributed throughout the city, and her story was featured in the news, generating significant public interest. The police received dozens of calls daily, but most information turned out to be false or mistaken. Sean participated in the search efforts, despite being the prime suspect, and even gave a media interview, pleading for help and displaying photos of the happy couple. The search for Alicia expanded to include abandoned buildings, wooded areas, and wastelands. Her parents, believing she was alive and being held against her will, appealed to the public for help. The police suspected someone close to Alicia might be involved, possibly killing her, due to the lack of signs of struggle or forced entry. Despite their efforts, no concrete leads were found, and the case remained a mystery. 2 weeks after Alicia's disappearance, Sean was arrested on an unrelated charge of driving under the influence and resisting arrest. This led to speculation that he was drowning his guilt in alcohol. Alicia's parents gave another interview, revealing they had only known Sean through their daughter's accounts and didn't know him personally. They considered the possibility that Alicia might have hidden certain details about her relationship with Sean to avoid upsetting them. The police interviewed Sean's neighbors to see if they had noticed anything unusual, but no significant information emerged. The case seemed to have hit a dead end, with the only option left being to keep pressuring Sean to confess. However, a month after Alicia's disappearance, a surprising twist occurred. Daniel Sylvester, a 31-year-old man who lived nearby, called the police and confessed to killing Alicia, revealing where he had hidden her body. Daniel was a reclusive, unemployed man who lived with his mother in a house adjacent to the Ross family home. Despite living near each other, Daniel and Alicia had never interacted before, but Alicia had seen him a few times and considered him mentally unwell due to his odd behavior. Daniel had severe socialization issues from an early age and harbored deep resentment towards women. He was diagnosed with social anxiety disorder at the age of 8 and had been receiving continuous psychological care, although therapy didn't help much. In his teenage years, he confessed to having dark fantasies of attacking and overpowering a girl, which excited him. Despite these fantasies, specialists were confident that they would remain just in his imagination. After finishing school, Daniel stopped attending therapy sessions and decided not to continue his education. He became a recluse, living in his mother's house, almost completely isolating himself from the outside world. He spent his days sitting in his room, often visiting adult websites, and occasionally ventured out in the evenings to secretly watch his neighbors, peeping into their windows. He especially enjoyed watching when someone was engaged in intimate activities, which excited him. However, Daniel remained a virgin well into his 30s, satisfying himself with solitary activities. The neighbors hardly ever saw him and considered him a harmless guy. However, the mutilated body of Alicia was later found at the location Daniel had indicated, leaving many questions about why the police had overlooked him during their initial investigation. The condition of the remains indicated that the girl had been dealt with extreme cruelty, with injuries that suggested she had been hit by a car. The exact cause of death could not be determined, but at least 3 injuries were incompatible with life. Daniel initially claimed that he had an argument with his neighbor on a bush-covered path between their homes, during which she called him a loser, angering him, and he struck her on the head. When she fell, he kicked her several times in the chest. However, something in his story did not add up, and there were missing details and specifics. Law enforcement had to clarify the circumstances and chronology of events to learn how exactly the girl received such injuries. Daniel spied on his neighbor Alicia and her boyfriend on the fateful evening. He watched them from a window as they were intimate, then moved back to the bushes, but didn't leave. When Alicia's boyfriend left, she saw Daniel spying on her and became angry, yelling at him and calling him a pervert. She then turned to go back into the house, but Daniel snapped, leading to a brutal beating and murder. The word pervert triggered Daniel's rage, reminiscent of childhood taunts from girls. He punched Alicia powerfully on the head, knocking her to the ground, then choked and kicked her, inflicting 33 fractures and extensive internal bleeding. After realizing Alicia was dead, Daniel moved her body to his garage, stripped her naked, and masturbated to relieve tension. He then put the corpse in the trunk of his mother's car and disposed of it in a secluded area outside the city. Upon returning home, he showered, changed clothes, and behaved as if nothing had happened. Daniel confessed to the crime but claimed it was unintentional, citing his mental illness and anger issues. However, the prosecution argued that despite his mental health issues, Daniel was fully aware of the consequences of his actions and acted with merciless intent. The court ordered a psychiatric evaluation, which confirmed Daniel's responsibility for his actions. Daniel was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 16 years. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Vicki Roberts. Vicki Roberts, born Victoria Smith, was born in September 1984 in Cheshire, England. She grew up in a conservative and religious family with an older sister. The sisters attended a Christian school where they developed their musical talents and sang in the choir. Vicki was known for being kind, friendly, and helpful, always willing to lend a hand. After high school, Vicki enrolled in university and worked part-time at an IKEA store to fund her education. That's where she met Michael Roberts, a charismatic and sociable young man who was only a year older than her. Michael was also a student and an athlete who took care of his appearance. Initially, Vicki found Michael too talkative and intrusive, but he eventually won her over with his charming personality. Michael was born in June 1983 in Warrington, Cheshire, to a prominent chemical engineer and his family. As the eldest of 2 sons, Michael was raised with high expectations and strict discipline. His parents instilled in him the belief that he was destined for greatness, and Michael grew up to be ambitious, driven, and confident. He was a natural socialite effortlessly making friends and commanding attention with his charismatic personality. His striking appearance, sense of humor, and intellectual curiosity only added to his charm. However, his parents' constant praise and emphasis on his superiority may have contributed to Michael's growing narcissism, which intensified over time. Michael desperately wanted to please his parents, so he strived to be the perfect son and meet their expectations. Meanwhile, Roberts, a womanizer, had a string of girlfriends and mistresses. He was skilled at secretly dating multiple people simultaneously, making each one believe they were the only one. He got a thrill from pursuing girls, particularly those who seemed out of his reach. One such girl was Vicki, who Michael was determined to win over. Initially, she kept him at arm's length, rejecting even his casual invitations to walk together after work or grab coffee. Vicki was a dedicated student and devoted her free time to church activities, leaving no room for dating or romance. It took Michael a few months to convince Vicki to go out with him. He won her over with his charming and sweet nature, showering her with flowers, gifts, and little surprises. He even took her to meet his parents, who adored her and gave their seal of approval for their son's choice. Vicki was convinced of his sincerity and eventually agreed to be his girlfriend. Michael became her first love and, for a while, her only one. She was deeply happy with him, and it seemed like destiny had brought them together. Michael, too, seemed to fall in love and was ready to settle down, but their happiness was short-lived. From the outside, their relationship looked perfect. They were both young, attractive, full of energy, ambitious, and had big plans for the future. However, Vicki soon discovered that Michael had an irrepressible sexual appetite and a passion for experimentation in bed. At first, Michael didn't pressure Vicki too much, fearing she would leave him. But once he was confident she wouldn't go anywhere, he revealed his true desires. The modest and religious Vicki was shocked by what was happening, but she was deeply in love with Michael and trusted him. For a long time, she kept their bedroom secrets hidden behind closed doors. Michael made her an official marriage proposal, which she happily accepted. She genuinely believed that after the wedding, her fiancé would stop his extreme experiments. Meanwhile, one of Vicki's closest friends began to notice that she was hiding bruises and small injuries under her clothes. The friend confronted Vicki, asking if her fiancé was abusing her and if she needed help. At first, Vicki denied everything, but eventually admitted that the marks were a result of her fiancé's extreme intimate experiments. Michael had a strong passion for bondage and using various toys and devices. Vicki confided in her friend that they had intimate encounters up to 5 times a day, but Michael still remained unsatisfied. He saw himself as a skilled lover, and intimacy was an art form and a way for him to express himself. Although Michael occasionally made concessions when Vicki refused to participate in some of his dangerous experiments, he usually managed to convince her to go along with his desires. After defending her diploma, Vic found herself facing an unplanned pregnancy, which prompted her to change jobs. She was soon hired as an account manager at a logistics company. Around the same time, Michael left IKEA and began working as a sales consultant at a large retail chain selling electronics. Michael flourished in his new role, leveraging his charisma, communication, and persuasive skills to consistently exceed sales targets. As a result, he quickly rose through the ranks, earning a promotion to senior sales. The management even considered transferring him to the main office, but first he needed to undergo training and improve his qualifications. As Michael attended training sessions and traveled to London for business, he felt proud and accomplished. However, in the process, he began to neglect his young fiancée, Vic. He only seemed to remember her existence when he needed intimacy, and their relationship suffered as a result. They stopped talking, hardly spent time together, and outside of the bedroom, Vic seemed to be invisible to him. Michael started having numerous affairs with co-workers, clients, and mere acquaintances while simultaneously planning his wedding to Vicki. He had an insatiable appetite for intimacy with various women, which boosted his self-esteem and gave him a sense of accomplishment. When Vicki discovered she was pregnant, she excitedly shared the news with Michael, expecting him to expedite their wedding plans. However, Michael's reaction was one of anger and frustration. He insisted that Vicki terminate the pregnancy, citing their young age and the idea that they had their whole lives ahead of them to have children. Vicki was shocked by his demand, but refused to consider abortion, prompting Michael to try to persuade her through other means. Michael convinced the bride, Vicki, that if her religious parents found out she was pregnant and living with him out of wedlock, they would be furious. He promised that they would keep the abortion a secret and have children after they got married. Vicki was torn, but Michael's persuasive nature eventually won her over, and she had the procedure. However, the abortion came with complications, and Vicki spent several days in the hospital, followed by 3 weeks of recovery. The doctor strictly forbade her from having sex during this time, which sent Michael into a rage. It dawned on Vicki that Michael had mental health issues and a sex addiction. Without intimacy, he became unhinged, often leaving the house, claiming he had urgent work matters to attend to. Vicki suspected that Michael was seeking intimacy outside their relationship, but she genuinely believed that everything would change after they got married, and she could help him overcome his infidelity. However, their 2-year engagement revealed a different reality. Michael had no intention of marrying Vicki, as his current situation suited him perfectly. He had a loyal fiancée at home who took care of his household needs, as well as multiple mistresses on the side, whom he regularly replaced. Vicki always took Michael's promises at face value, even when she discovered his infidelity. She forgave him as long as he assured her it was the last time and that he would change. However, as time passed, Vicki began to pressure Michael for marriage, as she wanted a complete family and children. Her parents also increasingly raised this question, but what ultimately pushed the issue was the insistence of Michael's parents, whom he didn't want to disappoint. Vicki was a kind and sweet person whom everyone loved. Her parents-in-law adored her and considered her an ideal match for their son. They were eager to see the couple get married and have grandchildren. With the help of their parents, the couple organized a grand wedding with all the trimmings, including a white dress and a limousine. The newlyweds looked happy and in love, with a long and fulfilling life ahead of them. After the wedding, the couple settled into a large and cozy house in a prestigious area of Warrington, not far from Robert's parents. However, what the relatives didn't know was that Michael had a dark side that Vicki was already well aware of. Despite being married, Michael did not love Vicki and only saw her as a way to appear normal in the eyes of others. Vicki never complained about Michael's infidelities and strange behaviors, and he was able to continue cheating on her without anyone suspecting a thing. At work, Michael was successful, earning promotions and a good salary after being transferred to a new office. Michael's direct supervisor, Carrie Hall, was a 10-year-old older, divorced mother who worked as the head of administration at Phones for You. Despite her busy schedule, she was attractive, well-groomed, and strong-willed as required by her position. For a long time, she ignored the signs of attention from her young subordinate, Michael. However, Michael saw this as a challenge and made a concerted effort to win her over, using his natural charm and eloquence. After about a month, Carrie reciprocated and they began a romantic relationship, secretly meeting in hotel rooms. Carrie described their relationship as turbulent, passionate, and experimental. As a mature, self-confident woman, Carrie was flattered by the attention of a younger man and was open to trying new things. With her, Michael could fulfill his fantasies that he couldn't with his modest wife. Michael frequently deceived his wife by claiming he was working late or attending corporate trainings, when in reality, he was meeting his mistress. He confided in his mistress about his unhappiness in his marriage, calling it a youthful mistake and expressing his willingness to divorce his wife. However, he failed to take action as his wife refused to grant him a divorce. The affair with Carrie lasted over a year, but she didn't pressure him for divorce. Content with their secret hotel trysts, physical marks, and risky games, Carrie, a sports enthusiast who always took pride in her figure, suddenly changed her style after starting a relationship with Michael. She began wearing long-sleeved, high-necked clothes, which was unusual for her. A concerned friend noticed the change, and Carrie confided in her about Michael's unusual intimate preferences. She revealed that Michael enjoyed experimenting with rough, controlling behaviors, such as biting, squeezing, and tying her up. Carrie showed her friend the physical marks these activities had left on her body. Although her friend urged her to go to the police, Carrie refused, saying that she had consented to these activities and that Michael usually warned her beforehand. However, she admitted that things sometimes got out of control, like when Michael would strangle her to supposedly enhance her pleasure, causing her to lose consciousness. Despite fearing these strangulation games, Carrie continued to succumb to Michael's persuasion, hoping that he would eventually tire of these cruel experiments or that she would become desensitized to them. Michael's wife and mistresses didn't try to intervene. Before they got married, Vicki had already suspected Michael's infidelity through open letters and a love letter. Despite knowing about his affairs, she believed her love and care could transform him into an exemplary family man. However, after their wedding, the situation deteriorated, and Michael convincingly denied his cheating. Vicki decided to investigate her husband's infidelity by looking through his phone while he was asleep. She was shocked to discover numerous intimate conversations between Michael and Carrie, as well as other girls, including explicit photos. Despite her devastation, Vicki did not want to upset her family, so she kept the discovery to herself and moved in with a friend instead of telling her parents and sister. Before leaving, Vicki wrote a heartfelt letter to Michael, confessing her love for him and acknowledging that he was the central figure in her life. However, she also made it clear that she was aware of his infidelity and would not tolerate it. Vicki informed Michael that she was giving him time to reflect on their relationship, but she would not stay in the marriage if his behavior continued. She wrote the letter by hand and left it on the refrigerator for him to find. Michael didn't feel emotional about the message, nor was he upset by his wife's departure. However, he didn't want to lose the comfort of having a quiet and obedient partner who took care of the household and put up with his quirky behavior and unusual tastes. That same evening, Michael went to Vicki's friend's house, bringing a large bouquet of flowers. He got down on his knees, apologized, and begged Vicki to come back to him, promising to be faithful and making her his one and only. Vicki wanted to believe him and decided to return home, where a new mistress was waiting. Michael didn't stop seeing Carrie, but he became more cautious and even made an effort to come home for dinner, which his wife had carefully prepared. He deleted messages on his phone, changed the password on his social media profiles, and started an affair with a young employee named Karen Wilson, who was engaged to be married. Despite this, Michael pursued Karen relentlessly, making himself out to be a miserable and unhappy lover. He was so drawn to Karen that after 2 months, he decided to end things with 33-year-old Carrie Hall, whom he had grown tired of. Michael told Karen a fabricated story about being unhappy in his marriage and promised to leave his wife soon. Karen eventually gave in, and they became intimate in the office. A week later, she broke off her engagement and waited for Michael to follow through on his promise. Michael didn't plan to divorce Vicki, but he wanted to end their connection and start a new relationship with another woman. To achieve this, he lied to Vicki, telling her that he had already filed for divorce and moved in with his parents. This was a fatal mistake, as Vicki became suspicious that he was still cheating on her. Decided to take action, Vicki waited until Michael was in the shower and took his phone, but she found nothing incriminating because he had deleted all text messages and changed the password on his social media account. Undeterred, Vicki waited until Michael fell asleep and then took his work laptop, where she discovered his account on the social network was still active. On the laptop, she found conversations with his new girlfriend, in which he confessed his love, claimed to be divorcing his wife, and said he was living with his parents. The discovery was a huge shock for Vicki. She took screenshots of the intimate messages as proof of her husband's infidelity and saved them on her laptop. She also found several hotel room receipts in his wallet, which further implicated him. The next morning, Vicki confronted Michael with the evidence, and for the first time in their relationship, she lost her temper. Michael tried to apologize and promised to change, but Vicki threatened to tell his parents everything, hoping they could finally make him see sense. Michael was furious when his wife Vicki threatened to reveal his secrets to his parents. In a fit of rage, he slapped her. Vicki, determined to carry out her threat, got up and headed for the door. Michael caught up with her, grabbed a heavy jewelry box from the dressing table, and hit her twice on the head, knocking her unconscious. Then, he squeezed her throat with his hands until she stopped breathing. With no remorse, Michael wrapped Vicki's lifeless body in a blanket, packed it into several large garbage bags, and carried it to the garage. He then quickly cleaned up the house, removing most of Vicki's belongings. After calling Karen, he invited her over and they had dinner, enjoying themselves in the same house where he had just murdered his wife. The next day, Michael ran off with Karen, leaving behind the scene of his crime. Michael told his parents that his wife had left him for another man. To convince them, he went to their home, cried on his mother's shoulder, and showed her messages on his wife's phone. But what he didn't reveal was that he had sent those messages himself, pretending to be his wife. The messages said that she had lost interest in him, met someone else, and wanted to live with this new person. Meanwhile, Michael also sent messages to his wife's parents from her phone, saying that she had fallen in love with someone else, left with him, and asked them not to contact her and give her space. The Smiths, concerned about their daughter Vicki, immediately tried to contact her, but their calls were consistently rejected. In response, they only received messages asking them to give her time, which seemed strange to them. They then decided to visit Michael's house to get some answers, but his story only raised more questions and doubts. When they discovered that Vicki had stopped showing up for work without warning, they became even more worried and decided to file a police report. On December 1, 2009, the police launched an investigation. It was discovered that Michael had purchased a shovel, rope, rags, and detergents from a hardware store that day, which seemed suspicious. However, he hadn't disposed of the body by the time the police arrived at his home. Although the police didn't find anything incriminating, Michael's behavior and story raised many questions. What was particularly striking was that they overlooked a large package in the corner of the garage. During the initial inspection of the marital home, no signs of the missing woman's clothes, documents, or personal belongings were found, suggesting that she might have voluntarily left. However, Vicki's laptop was discovered in the bedroom, and upon seizing it, the police found screenshots of Michael's conversations with his mistresses, which Vicki had saved. The police then requested a geolocation of Vicki's cell phone, which regularly received messages from her husband and relatives. The search revealed that the phone had been in the marital home the entire time. In a subsequent search of the Roberts home, law enforcement officials made a disturbing discovery in the garage. But just as they were processing this new evidence, Michael suddenly vanished from under their noses, taking a wallet with cash that allowed him to remain hidden for several days. Michael's money ran out, so he turned to one of his mistresses, Lavina T., asking to stay with her for a while. However, one evening, she heard on the news that Michael was wanted for murdering his wife. Without hesitation, she reported his whereabouts to the police, leading to his arrest. When questioned, Michael broke down in tears, claiming he was innocent. He insisted that his wife's death was an accident, resulting from a consensual intimate game where she asked him to strangle her with a rope belt, but he overdid it. However, forensic experts uncovered contradictory evidence. The autopsy revealed that Michael's wife was strangled with bare hands, attacked from behind, and had 2 extensive hematomas on her head that occurred before her death, ruling out any connection to the alleged intimate game. Michael's trial began in January 2010, where he continued to plead innocence and hoped for leniency. Nevertheless, the autopsy results proved that Michael brutally hit his wife twice on the head and then strangled her, hiding her body in the garage. Michael Roberts was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, but with the possibility of parole after serving 17 years. This means that, if he demonstrates good behavior, he may be eligible for release as early as 2027.